Chapter 92. Wang Yuetong lived in Yonghua Villa. One day had passed since the start of the Sky Academy. Li Tianlan didn't return to the academy, and the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai didn't even mention him. It was said that Wang Tianzong had left Huading. No one knew whether he left in a hurry without informing Zhuang Huayang or because the old headmaster neglected something. In short, the search task issued by the Sky Academy was still in progress. Although the Sky Academy had officially opened, countless people were still searching for the attractive 200 credits of the search task. Sometimes, when Li Tianlan looked at Wang Yuetong who was wandering in front of him, he even felt that he was looking at credits. Li Beidian, Ning Qianxing, and Yu Qinyan all called and asked why Li Tianlan hadn't returned to the school. Li Tianlan could only say that he was temporarily occupied, especially to Yu Qinyan. He couldn't tell the truth. The old man Yu Donglai had regarded him as the only hope. If he knew his current state, God knew how much he would suffer. Sitting in the living room, Li Tianlan thought of the old man and hesitated. He knew that the most important thing to do now was to meet Yu Donglai, but he didn't know how to explain his current state to him. At present, his vitality had completely stabilized. With the supplement of the immortality potion, he could live for at least 3 to 5 years. At the same time, his realm was also stabilized. One step was chi controlling, and the other was thunder shocking. Now he was unprecedentedly powerful in terms of combat capability, but the price he paid was that he had no hope of entering the invincible realm for the rest of his life. It was even impossible for him to enter the thunder-shocking realm completely. In such a situation, it was impossible for Li Tianlan to be in a good mood, but he didn't despair either. After all, he was still alive. He had experienced too much despair in the desert of Beijiang that year. Now all this was at best a trivial matter for him. He didn't want to complain, let alone feel disappointed or afraid about the future. Now he just wanted to do something. But this was also the biggest problem, because he couldn't find a suitable entry point at all. At present, he was not even familiar with Huading, let alone the case of treason. The curtain was the most powerful weapon he could use at present, but it could not provide much help for the case of treason. In this case, his best choice was to go to Yu Donglai. In recent years, Yu Donglai had stood aloof from worldly affairs and stayed dormant in Huading. But Li Tianlan was sure that he must have some clues. No matter how small and fragmentary the clues were, it was better than nothing. As long as he had an entry point and gave it to the curtain, Li Tianlan could do a lot more. Outside the window, the rain was getting heavier. Li Tianlan sat silently in the living room and made a pot of tea. The rain continued for 2 consecutive days, turning from moderate rain to heavy rain, making the whole city noisy. Sitting in the villa and looking out of the window, the whole Huading seemed to be far away from the bustling city, leaving only desolation. A thin coat was put on Li Tianlan from behind. Wang Yuetong's sweet voice sounded behind him. "Senior brother, aren't you cold? You can't catch a cold in your current condition." Wang Yuetong, who had just taken a bath, sat beside Li Tianlan with the newborn golden retriever in her arms. She chuckled and said, "Do you want to watch TV?" Smelling the fresh and fragrant smell around him, Li Tianlan smiled and said, "Whatever. When are you going back to the Sky Academy?" "Whatever." Wang Yuetong flipped her long hair, which was still a little wet. She held the dog in one hand, stretched out her snow-white and tender little foot, pressed the remote control, and said casually, "I'll go whenever you go. Didn't the academy give me a task? I've been living in seclusion recently. I'll wait for you to take me to the Sky Academy to get my credits." "I'm afraid the task will be cancelled in a few days." Li Tianlan smiled helplessly. "In my current condition, going to the Sky Academy is a complete waste of time. Fortunately, although my vitality has been consumed a lot, my combat strength has increased a lot. Recently, I plan to do something and have no time to accompany you. How about you go to the Sky Academy first? Otherwise, when the headmaster cancels the task, credits will be deducted. Do you want to wait to be expelled?" The internal management of the Sky Academy was strict and loose. There was a saying that credits trumped everything. In theory, as long as one had enough credits, it didn't matter how long one was absent. 1 credit would be deducted for each day of absence. When the credit was deducted to a negative number, the teaching office of the academy would contact the student to confirm the student's status. Under such circumstances, if the student still refused to go back to the academy, the teaching office would hand over the student's information to the political department. The political department would discuss whether to delete the student's file. If the answer after the discussion was yes, the political department would issue a notice to completely remove the student from the Sky Academy. If the answer after the discussion was no, the political department would send the student's information back to the teaching office, which would come up with a punishment decision to see the follow-up effect. Because of the entrance maneuver, Li Tianlan had 50 credits. Wang Yuetong originally had 80 credits, but she used 60 credits to exchange a bottle of healing potion for Li Tianlan. Now she only had 20 credits left. If Wang Yuetong didn't go to class and the academy's task was cancelled, her information would be sent to the political department 20 days later. It doesn't matter. I'll call Uncle Yi later. I won't be expelled. At most, I'll have to bear a few punishments. I can make up for it with credits later. Wang Yuetong casually changed the channel with the remote control. Her big eyes blinked and her long eyelashes trembled slightly, making people want to pounce on her and kiss her. Uncle Yi? Li Tianlan was stunned. Yi Fengqing, the director of the political department of the Sky Academy and a good friend of my second uncle. Wang Yuetong sat cross-legged on the sofa and chuckled. Her body was soft and it seemed that she wanted to lean into Li Tianlan's arms. The little golden retriever in her arms jumped onto Li Tianlan's arm first and gently licked the back of Li Tianlan's hand. It was a little itchy. Li Tianlan nodded with the dog in his arms and then shook his head. Anyway, let's go back quickly. He handed the dog in his hand to Wang Yuetong, stood up and said, I'm going out. He still decided to see you Dong Lai. Otherwise, there was no point in staying here every day. With his current strength, he could defeat almost all the freshmen and seniors and even most of the teachers and directors when he returned to the Sky Academy. Li Tianlan had no confidence at all to fight against tribulation. Not to mention confidence, Li Tianlan couldn't even escape if he really fought against him. Except for tribulation, he was also a little afraid to fight against Zhuang Huayang. But except for these two, he dared to fight against anyone. But obviously, it was not his goal to dominate the Sky Academy. From the moment his hair turned white, he didn't plan to go back to the Sky Academy. As for credits, it didn't matter at all if they were deducted. Then come back early. Wang Yuetong stood up with the dog in her arms and walked to Li Tianlan in slippers. It seemed that she wanted to see him out. Li Tianlan put on his clothes and went straight to the door with Wang Yuetong. The key was inserted into the lock and the sound of the door opening was heard. Li Tianlan's expression froze and then became ecstatic. He almost rushed to the door. Wang Yuetong was also stunned. Looking at Li Tianlan's excited back, she subconsciously held the golden retriever in her arms tightly, seeming a little nervous. Qin Weibai's figure appeared at the door. Looking at Li Tianlan, who rushed to her excitedly, she was stunned, and her cold eyes suddenly became soft. Have you eaten? She walked in with flaming fire, bent down at the porch to take off her high heels, and said softly. The weather in Huading in May was not cold. It was rainy and cloudy, and it was just a little cool outside. But Qin Weibai was wearing a very thick coat, and her dreamy face was full of haggardness and exhaustion. Her face was pale, and even her rosy and beautiful lips were bloodless. Li Tianlan's heart sank. He suddenly took a step forward, looked at Qin Weibai seriously and said, Are you hurt? I was attacked by two people at the peak of the thundershocking realm in Billy State, but they were blocked by horsewomen. I was slightly injured, but it's okay. I'll be fine after a few days of recuperation. Qin Weibai said with a chuckle. Her eyes, which had been a little dim, gradually brightened up when she saw Li Tianlan. She took off her coat and put on her slippers. She directly put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck and kissed him hard on the face. Then she smiled and said, I missed you so much. Li Tianlan put his arms around Qin Weibai's slender waist, and his heart gradually became calm. He whispered, It's okay, it's okay. Come, I've brought you something good. Your injuries will heal very quickly. Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan's hand, and her eyes were happy. My sister took a lot of effort to get it back. You must thank her someday. She took Li Tianlan's arm and walked to the sofa. When she passed by Wang Yuetong, she looked steadily forward, as if she did not see her at all. At this moment, Qin Weibai was wearing a gray sweater and black tights. Her ordinary clothes showed her perfect figure completely. She held Li Tianlan's arm casually, and at this moment, she completely became the hostess of the family. Wang Yuetong, whose hair was still a little wet, was wearing pajamas and holding the dog. She looked lazy and beautiful, but in front of Qin Weibai, she did not have much confidence. It seemed that every time she appeared in front of her, Wang Yuetong felt that she was dwarfed. She bit her lip hard, walked to the other side of Li Tianlan with the dog in her arms, and sat down almost next to him on the sofa. Li Tianlan glanced at her, and his face seemed a little unnatural. Wang Yuetong's face also turned red. All of Qin Weibai's movements were natural, and even her sitting posture was very casual. But her performance was a little deliberate. Li Tianlan opened his mouth subconsciously and wanted to explain, but Qin Weibai seemed to see nothing and waved at Flaming Fire, who had just entered the door. Flaming Fire came over with a clear crystal box and put it on the tea table. The light in the living room was on, and the soft light fell on the crystal box. The light refracted out was colorful and had a very strange and dreamy feeling. Li Tianlan's eyes fell on the pattern in front of the box, and he slightly raised his eyebrows. The simple lines on the pattern were majestic and impressive. Li Tianlan had seen this pattern before. It was on the membership card that Wang Xiaoyao handed him when he went to the garden party for the first time. The sky and the sea. This is something from my family. Wang Yuetong's small face changed slightly and she said softly. Qin Weibai glanced at her and nodded slightly. Suddenly she said, "Did you give Tianlan the first generation of immortality potion?" Wang Yuetong glanced at her and nodded. "Thank you," Qin Weibai said with sincere and earnest eyes. Any expert in the dark world knew the status of the immortality potion in the Wang family of Beihai. For Li Tianlan, Wang Yuetong could do so much, so Qin Weibai was grateful to her. Wang Yuetong curled her rosy lips. Listening to Qin Weibai's sincere thanks, she subconsciously tightened her arms around the little golden retriever in her arms and felt wronged and wanted to cry. The golden retriever seemed to be in pain from being squeezed. It struggled and whimpered, climbed out of Wang Yuetong's arms, past Li Tianlan, and directly got into Qin Weibai's arms. "That's my dog." Wang Yuetong felt more wronged and wanted to cry. She couldn't compete with a man, but could even her pet not compete with her? We are a family. Why should we separate ourselves? Qin Weibai smiled casually, intentionally or unintentionally, with a meaningful meaning. Wang Yuetong suddenly blushed. Li Tianlan's heart trembled, and he didn't dare to say a word. Flaming Fire had opened the box in front of her and looked at the potions inside. She said calmly, "This is the immortality series of the Wang family of Beihai. The whole set is here. It is still being activated. It will be finished in about 8 hours. By then your injury will be completely healed." Immortality. The whole set. Li Tianlan looked at the box, lost in thought. Immortality series? Wang Yuetong suddenly stood up and stared at Flaming Fire. She said in a cold tone, "Where is my dad? What did you do to him?" The immortality series was the most precious treasure of the Wang family of Beihai. If the people of Samsara could get it, then her father, Wang Yuetong's heart trembled violently. Her Majesty Sword Emperor ranks first on the divine list. Who can do anything to her? This is a deal. My sister took a sword strike from her and got this set of immortality series at the cost of serious injury. Qin Weibai said calmly. As for whether she deliberately simplified the process or it was just the version she heard from the master of Samsara Palace, no one knew. After a long silence, Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai and said seriously, "Thank the palace master for me." "What palace master? You have to call her sister in the future." Qin Weibai muttered with some dissatisfaction and sighed softly. "I wanted to stay and take care of my sister. When she recovered, I could ask Flaming Fire to give the immortality series to you. But Marshal Dongqing and Headmaster Zhuang made an appointment with me, so I came back on the way. Tunlun, time is tight. I have to leave in a minute." Li Tianlan was stunned and couldn't come to his senses for a while. My sister was seriously injured. When she fought with Tianqin, she was seriously injured, and then she went to the Wang family of Beihai. Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's hand and said softly, "When she recovers, I will come back to accompany you as soon as possible." Li Tianlan nodded silently. He said softly, "Why did the marshal and the headmaster make an appointment with you?" "Not only me, but also you. And Zhong Yongming." Qin Weibai gently raised the corner of her mouth. Her smile was playful and beautiful. "Zhong Yongming." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and remembered the information sent back by the Curtain organization yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, the organization department of Zhongzhou State and the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State simultaneously announced several heavyweight personnel transfers. Liu Xiuqing, the deputy mayor of Huading, served as a member of the Standing Committee of Huading and the director of the Ministry of Politics and Law. He Ping, the former director of the Ministry of Politics and Law, was under investigation for major violations of discipline. Bai Qingqian, the governor of Qinzhou Province, was transferred to Guangdong Province as the first secretary. Dong Chengqiuqi, the mayor of Wudong New Area, served as a member of the Standing Committee of Huading and secretary of Wudong New Area. Tan Qinghua was transferred to the Southern Theater of Operations of Zhongzhou State as the deputy commander. The former chief of staff of the Southern Theater of Operations, Yi Fenglin, was transferred to the Eastern Theater of Operations as the deputy commander. In less than a few days after Samsara destroyed Night Spirit, Zhongzhou State immediately reacted. What this meant was self-evident. The stability of Huading that Zhong Yongming had always emphasized did not come true after all. On the contrary, the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, Ning Ziyuan, mentioned strengthening the unity of the Eastern Theater of Operations. The high-level officials of Zhongzhou State gave clear support and attitude. As for what was happening in Zhongzhou State in private, it was beyond his reach for the time being. However, Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang made an appointment with Qin Weibai and Zhong Yongming. The fact that the other party had accepted the invitation was enough to explain the situation. Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang. Chapter 93. Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang came quickly. Before they finished a cup of tea, their figures had passed through the heavy rain outside and knocked on the door of the villa. "Boss Qin, congratulations." Looking at Qin Weibai, who opened the door for them, Dongqing Wudi said with a smile. His tone was gentle and casual, and there seemed to be some intimacy. The Samsara Palace destroyed the Night Spirit organization in one fell swoop, and the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld changed hands. This could be said to be the biggest thing that happened in the Dark World in recent years. In just a few days, there were constant disturbances. At present, the rise of the Samsara Palace as a new superpower in the Dark World was already unstoppable. Not only Zhongzhou State, but in the past few days, many countries around the world held high-level meetings, trying to get in touch with the Samsara Palace and test their attitude. Zhongzhou State was now in a favorable position. At the plenary meeting of the decision-making committee, the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State made prompt decisions. They took He Ping, transferred Tan Qinghua, and promoted Dong Chengqiuqi, which could be said to be the goodwill released by Zhongzhou State. As one of the members of the decision-making committee of Zhongzhou State, Dongqing Wudi personally attended the meeting in Yuzhou. At the meeting, a member of the academics even proposed to invite the Samsara Palace to develop in Zhongzhou State, but it was strongly opposed by the Southeast Group, the Special Warfare Group, and the Prince Group. In the end, the matter was left unsettled. But this could also be seen as a tentative move by the academics. Now it was opposed, which could only mean that the time was not ripe enough. When this topic was mentioned next time, it was estimated that the academics directors would come forward. At that time, it might become a contest between the six. From the standpoint of the Dongqing clan, there was no way for them to stay out of it. So now looking at Qin Weibai again, Dongqing Wudi could not simply regard her as someone who competed with his daughter for her fiancé. Comrade? One of our own? Alliance? This strange feeling was mixed together, and the sense of distance between them seemed to be blurred a lot. Same. Qin Weibai gently raised the corners of her mouth. Her smile was beautiful, calm and generous. She glanced at Dongqing Wudi and said seriously, "General, thank you." When the master of Samsara Palace and the 12 supermasters went straight to Mount Dibing, Dongqing Wudi happened to appear in the Black Dragon Army of the Border Control Corps. The Black Dragon Army was one of the 5 armies under the Border Control Corps, with a total of 100,000 elites. It was responsible for the defense of the northeast border of Zhongzhou State. If 30,000 elites traveled by sea and land, it would take them less than 2 hours to enter Beihai Province. What this meant was self-evident. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at Qin Weibai, smiled, and asked Zhuang Huayang to enter the villa together. "Boss Qin, the body of the attacker is still in the Sky Academy. I brought some photos here. Have a look. If you don't recognize him, I'll ask someone to throw the body into the Yangtze River." Zhuang Huayang walked in and handed Qin Weibai an envelope. He smiled at Li Tianlan and Wang Yuetong, who were in pajamas, and said with a strange look in his eyes, "You look good. When will you go back to the Sky Academy?" "I'll go back today." Li Tianlan smiled. He had intended to do something, but now the whole set of immortality potion had appeared. If his injury was completely healed, the vitality in his body would completely suppress his current strength and turn it into potential. His realm would also be stabilized in the chi-controlling realm. Without the incredible combat capability, the door of the invincible realm would open to him. In this way, re-entering the Sky Academy became his top priority. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm. The gains and losses didn't seem to affect his state of mind at all. Zhuang Huayang patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder with a gratified look in his eyes. Beside him, Dongqing Wudi's eyes were obviously not quite right. He looked at Li Tianlan and then at Wang Yuetong, who was in pajamas, and said in a gloomy tone, "Tianlan Yu, good boy, when we were in Zhongyuan province, you swore that you would not marry Rushi. I thought you were a gentleman. But in just a few days, Wang Yuetong can live in Yonghua Villa in front of Qin Weibai. In this case, why don't you marry my daughter?" Qin Weibai thought. "Rushi is a girl as pure as ice and clean as jade. She is no worse than the little princess in front of me. If you refuse, do you really think I dare not force you to marry Rushi?" Dongqing Wudi was almost bursting with anger. His face became more and more gloomy, and it seemed that he was really angry. Flaming fire. Qin Weibai, who stood aside and opened the envelope, suddenly spoke. She looked at the photo of the black-robed corpse in the envelope, and her tone was a little cold. She handed the photo in her hand to Horsewoman and sneered. "I was wondering who was planning to fish in troubled waters in Zhongzhou State. It turned out to be him. Tell Horsewoman to go to the Sky Academy later, bring out this man's body, and throw it to Hanyu Palace." Flaming Fire took the photo silently and glanced at Qin Weibai. "Don't you need to say anything?" "No." Qin Weibai said indifferently, "I'm waiting for him to give me an explanation." Flaming Fire nodded and began to make a phone call. Zhuang Huayang turned his head in surprise and looked at Qin Weibai. "Boss Qin, does the attacker have anything to do with Hanyu Palace?" They were not close just now, so he only vaguely heard Hanyu Palace, but he did not hear the specific details. In fact, the academics had also secretly investigated the identity of the black-robed man, but they found nothing. If the other party really had something to do with Hanyu Palace, then they had to be cautious. In Huading, Hanyu Palace was just a club, but the power behind this so-called club had been extremely vigilant for hundreds of years. Qin Weibai shook her head slightly and did not say much. Instead, she looked at Dongqing Wudi, whose face was a little gloomy, and asked curiously, "General, what's going on?" Li Tianlan looked embarrassed and did not know how to explain at all. He had kissed and hugged the beautiful little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. He could not tell Dongqing Wudi that she had nothing to do with him, but he always felt awkward to admit that they had something to do with each other. He did not know what to say, but Qin Weibai came over again. Li Tianlan suddenly felt even more annoyed. Dongqing Wudi suppressed his anger, glared at Li Tianlan, and said hesitantly, "Boss Qin, little Princess Yuerong, yes, she's my sister." Qin Weibai's tone was light, with an indescribable grace. Wang Yuetong blushed. Wang Yuetong blushed. She saw Qin Weibai's eyes sweep over her. Qin Weibai's eyes were not so stern, but there was an inexplicable pressure in them. She bit her lip and called her sister in a low voice. Her face became even redder. But strangely, when she called her sister, she did not feel that she had to swallow her anger. Instead, she felt that it was natural. Qin Weibai nodded and looked at Dongqing Wudi again. Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang smiled bitterly at the same time. Sister? What the hell was going on? The master of Samsara Palace and the 12 supermasters of Samsara went straight to Mount Dibbing. 13 of them went up the mountain and 13 went down the mountain. Although they did not fight, Wang Tianzong's Sword Emperor Palace was torn to pieces by the sword intent, and the whole mountaintop was also damaged to different degrees. Although the two sides did not fall out in the end, in many people's eyes, the grudge was formed. But now the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai suddenly became the sister of the spokesperson of Samsara Palace. Dongqing Wudi's mind was in a mess. The situation between men and women, especially men and women who were different from ordinary people, was almost more chaotic than the general trend of Zhongzhou state. He took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep breath. Without thinking, he asked instinctively, "What about Rushi? If she wants, she's also a sister." Qin Weibai said calmly. Li Tianlan only felt a tingling in his scalp. Looking at Qin Weibai, who was more and more graceful and magnanimous, his mood was complicated. He wanted to press her on the bed and spank her. Dongqing Wudi was even more depressed. As soon as he said that, he felt that he was discussing taking a concubine with Li Tianlan's legal wife. This matter didn't even need Li Tianlan's consent. The legal wife was in charge of the backyard. Dongqing Wudi smoked in silence and did not respond. His precious daughter was going to be Li Tianlan's concubine? He, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou state, really could not think of this in a short time. Is it time? Let's go? Qin Weibai looked down at the watch on her wrist and looked at Li Tianlan. There was a soft smile in her bright eyes. She suddenly remembered a pair of Vacheron Constantin watches that she had ordered a few days ago. They were lovers' watches. It seemed that her and Li Tianlan's names could be engraved on the hands of each watch. The faces of the watches were also engraved with blessings written in ancient Greek. A director of Richemont Group, the manufacturer of Vacheron Constantin, personally urged the designer to design the renderings. Qin Weibai was satisfied, but her only regret was that she had to wait a year to wear the couple's watches with Li Tianlan. This kind of thinking that belonged to a little woman or even a little girl might be a little naive, but Qin Weibai had become more and more unable to restrain her feelings. Especially when she woke up in the dead of night and felt Li Tianlan holding her tightly in his arms, Qin Weibai always felt that this was her destiny. Her life belonged to him. She even wanted to announce to the whole world that he was her man and would always be her man from now on. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Her eyes were bright and tender, with a kind of deep affection that could shake people's souls. Her persistence seemed eternal. Li Tianlan walked up to her and held her cold hand. He nodded and said, "Let's go." The place that Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang had agreed with Zhong Yongming was Tongha Hospital. The hospital was not large, about 50 acres in area. The internal planning was reasonable, with rockery and flower beds in picturesque disorder. A small river about 6 or 7 meters wide flowed around the hospital. The water was clear and running. Stepping on the white stone bridge, listening to the sound of the water and looking at the flowers in front of them, everything around them seemed to become deep and quiet, making people feel relaxed and happy. This hospital looked inconspicuous from the outside but could be said to be a different world inside. It could be said to be the best private hospital in Huading, even in the south. The medical level and advanced equipment were second to none. The interior was even more heavily guarded. With the 9-story main building in the courtyard as the center, everything in the hospital could be said to be mysterious, and the security and ornamental value could not be better. The hospital was not listed, and it was not open to the public on weekdays. Instead, it implemented a system similar to membership. On weekdays, most of the senior people in Huading were recuperating here, or some people with sensitive identities came here to temporarily avoid the disturbances of the outside world. Therefore, most of the time, there was a cold and quiet atmosphere of leisure here. The boss of Tongha Hospital was the Han family. As the top neutral wealthy family in Huading and the largest financial tycoon in Zhongzhou State, Han Donglu, the current patriarch of the Han family, treated all the people of the six equally. Therefore, if the people of the six were not feeling well, almost all of them would choose to come to Tongha Hospital. Zhong Yue, who was beaten into a vegetative state by Wang Xiaoyao a few months ago. Zhong Xiaofeng, who was disabled by Li Tianlan a few days ago. Now they were all receiving treatment in Tongha Hospital. Zhong Yongming knew why Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang invited Zhong Yongming. Now that Samsara had destroyed Night Spirit and was in the limelight, and Li Tianlan had a close relationship with Qin Weibai, the spokesperson of Samsara. This identity made Zhong Yongming have to bear it for the time being, no matter how much he hated Li Tianlan. But they asked to meet at this place. Obviously, even if they compromised, they had reservations. Zhong Yongming, as a member of the decision-making committee, was also the leader of Huading. He could be said to be one of the most powerful figures in the whole Zhongzhou state. Even if it was a temporary concession, it was a courteous advance and retreat, not a bottomless groveling. Tianlan, the headmaster, and I are now as lobbyists invited by Boss Qin. Do you understand what I mean? Walking into the hospital, Dongqing Wudi suddenly spoke with concern in his eyes. Li Tianlan nodded silently. For the sake of protecting his identity, neither Zhuang Huayang nor Dongqing Wudi was suitable to show too much concern for him. Zhuang Huayang glanced at him, sighed softly, and shook his head without saying much. In recent years, the academics had been cooperating with Samsara, and the cooperation was pleasant. Now, through the transfer of Dongqing Wudi's wife, by Qingqian, the academics announced an alliance with the Dongqing clan in a very high-profile manner. In this way, it seemed reasonable for Qin Weibai to invite Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi to be lobbyists for Li Tianlan, and no one would think of Li Tianlan. As for in Yonghua Villa, Dongqing Wudi's domineering appearance deterred the elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations, and Ning Qianqing was also a shield. At present, the most suspicious thing was that Dongqing Wudi took Li Tianlan back to Zhongyuan province. This was an unconcealable loophole. Presumably, many people were speculating about the relationship between Li Tianlan and the Dongqing clan. However, the Li family and the Dongqing clan didn't seem to have much interaction on the surface. This alone wouldn't expose Li Tianlan's identity. Moreover, Dongqing Wudi only took him back to Zhongyuan province once because Li Tianlan possessed the wind and thunder veins. This matter could barely be explained as the Dongqing clan's solicitation, or the cooperation between the Dongqing clan and the Samsara palace. This series of things could barely remove Li Tianlan from the picture. Although the details couldn't stand scrutiny, the best thing was that outsiders didn't know the details at all except those involved. As long as they couldn't find out Li Tianlan's identity, they could only come to countless inexplicable conclusions no matter how much they guessed. Moreover, the storm in the dark world was about to rise, and the undercurrents were also surging inside Zhongzhou state. The alliance between the Dongqing clan and the academics had been confirmed. At this time, no one would pay too much attention to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan laughed at himself. Qin Weibai didn't know martial arts, but her current status was quite popular. In everyone's eyes, he should be a gigolo who depended on Qin Weibai now, right? We must keep a low profile later. It's not that Marshall and I can't be tough, but once we do so, it will arouse Zhong Yongming's suspicion. So we will put ourselves in the right position. If we can reach an agreement today, Zhong Xiaofeng's matter will be in the past, and at least you will be given enough time to grow up. Zhuang Huayang said solemnly. Lowering his posture and reconciling with Zhong Yongming was the best way at present. The grievances between Li Tianlan and the Zhong family could be handled from the official point of view, but the Zhong family was also a top wealthy and powerful family in Huading. Their revenge in private would only be more cruel. Now Qin Weibai had invited two heavyweight lobbyists. As long as Zhong Yongming could nod in front of Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi today, it would be impossible for him to change his mind in a short time. Nowadays, the storm in the dark world, the undercurrent in Huading, and the sensitive situation of the midterm change in Zhongzhou state were mixed together. It could be said that a slight change in one part would affect the whole situation. If Zhong Yongming changed his mind in private, it would be tantamount to becoming enemies with Dong Qingwudi and Zhuang Huayang. This consequence must be carefully considered for him, who had more ambitions. In other words, if Zhong Yongming was willing to nod today, even if he changed his mind in the future, it would be after the change in 2 years. At that time, everything would almost be settled, and he would have fewer scruples when he took action. And with 2 years to grow up, Li Tianlan would not be afraid of some private tricks of the Zhong family. This was the best situation that everyone could fight for Li Tianlan at present. It had become their consensus to wait for Li Tianlan to grow up quietly. Yes. Li Tianlan nodded and said with a smile, I know that a little impatience will spoil great plans. Zhuang Huayang glanced at Qin Weibai intentionally or unintentionally and smiled slightly bitterly. He believed that Li Tianlan could bear it. A guy who carried the glory of the god of war family for hundreds of years. A guy who carried all the grievances of the whole family and even Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun. A guy who grew up in the harsh environment of the border and had not been crushed by the pressure. Such a person, if necessary, could bear any humiliation calmly. But Li Tianlan could bear it, but could Qin Weibai beside him? Not to mention Qin Weibai, could Wang Yuetong, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, who had followed them here, bear it? Zhuang Huayang and Dong Qingwudi looked at each other, both worried. Zhong Yongming was forced to compromise. It was certain that he would make things difficult for Li Tianlan. But no one could tell whether Qin Weibai and Wang Yuetong would lose their temper or not. It was really hard to say what the result of this negotiation would be. The 5 people walked into the hall of the hospital in turn. In the hall, a young man in his 30s, who looked very gentle and quiet, came over and shook hands with Dong Qingwudi. He said with a lukewarm smile, Hello, General. I'm Secretary Zhong's secretary, Xiao He. Secretary Zhong asked me to take you up. Dong Qingwudi raised his eyebrows slightly, and he suddenly became fierce. Although he knew that this negotiation would be difficult, looking at the other party's appearance, Zhong Yongming could even be said to have no sincerity at all. Zhong Yongming was a member of the decision-making committee, and he was also a member of the decision-making committee. They were at the same level. Zhuang Huayang, a highly respected old principal, and Qin Weibai, who had a sensitive identity, only sent a secretary to greet them, and it was not an administrative secretary. Dong Qingwudi had never seen Xiao He before. He thought that he was similar to a personal secretary. Such neglect could be said to be extremely rude. Dong Qingwudi glanced at Zhuang Huayang, whose face was also a little ugly. Let's go. Qin Weibai glanced at Xiao He and said calmly. Xiao He had been staring at Qin Weibai with amazement. As a result, Qin Weibai glanced at him. Her eyes, which were not cold, were as oppressive as a mountain. He suddenly sobered up, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. A woman who could negotiate with his master, Secretary Zhong, was not someone he could touch, no matter how young she was. He smiled humbly, led the way into the elevator, and went straight to the VIP ward on the 6th floor. The decoration in the ward was luxurious and comfortable, and the light blue walls looked extremely warm. Xiao He walked through the living room with the 5 people behind him. After entering the ward, he said respectfully, Secretary Zhong, the guests are here. Li Tianlan recognized the top leader of Huading at a glance. He had seen the news in Huading yesterday. Zhong Yongming was nearly 60 years old this year, but he looked less than 50 years old. His dyed black hair was neatly combed, and he had a square face. He was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, giving off a solemn and meticulous feeling. He was dignified and had a steady aura. Zhong Xiaofeng had woken up, but with all his bones broken, he was paralyzed on the bed like a puddle of mud. Except for his eyeballs, he had no moving organs at all. When Li Tianlan and the others walked in, Zhong Yongming was sitting silently on the bed, smoking. No one knew what he was thinking. Hearing Xiao He's words, Zhong Yongming turned his head and glanced at them. His eyes fell on Li Tianlan almost immediately. Li Tianlan knew that Zhong Yongming did not know martial arts, but at this moment he still felt a strong and irresistible pressure coming on his face, heavy and cold. That was the momentum brought by absolute power to Zhong Yongming, which made his every move and every look bring suffocating pressure. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhong Yongming quietly. Through his eyes, Li Tianlan could clearly feel the coldness and rage in his eyes, which were undisguised killing intent and resentment. Li Tianlan's expression was calm, and even his voice revealed a kind of unchanging gentleness. He nodded and took the initiative to greet them. "Hello, Secretary Zhong. General, Headmaster, and Boss Qin, come and sit here." On the sofa in the ward, a tall middle-aged man in a military uniform stood up and said with a smile. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him and said nothing. Zhuang Huayang laughed and said, "Oh, it's Changjiang. Why are you here?" Lieutenant General Gu Changjiang, Director of Huading's Special Operations Bureau. His appearance here today was enough to show that Zhong Yongming also had some concerns about his own safety, so he asked him to be a bodyguard. Kunlun City was now extremely welcome for any help from the Prince Group. If today's negotiation broke down, perhaps Gu Changjiang would be most happy to see it. Zhuang Huayang thought silently and thoughtfully. "It's just a coincidence." Gu Changjiang smiled, and his performance was impeccable. Dongqing Wudi was not so patient. Feeling Zhong Yongming's cold eyes, he said flatly, "Comrade Yongming, this is Tianlan. Can we go out and have a talk?" "I'm not good at all." Zhong Yongming finally spoke, but he ignored Dongqing Wudi. He just looked at Li Tianlan and said in a cold tone, "I don't need your greetings. You disabled my son. In any case, you at least owe my son an apology." He stood up, walked up to Li Tianlan, and said word by word, "A most sincere apology, right?" "You're right," Li Tianlan said in a calm tone, and his face did not change. Zhong Yongming narrowed his eyes and looked seriously at the young man who could capture Qin Weibai's heart. After a long time, he gently twitched the corner of his mouth and said flatly, "We can talk about other things later." He pointed to the direction of the bed and ordered, "Now, you go to kneel to my son and say you're sorry 10 times, and I can consider letting you go for the time being. Kneel down and say you're sorry 10 times, and I can let you go for the time being." Except for Li Tianlan, everyone's face changed at the same time. No one expected that as soon as they met, Zhong Yuwei directly made a request that they could not accept. "Secretary Zhong," Zhuang Huayang frowned. Zhong Yuwei waved his hand and directly interrupted Zhuang Huayang's words. He said calmly, "You can choose not to kneel. Marshal Dongqing and Headmaster Zhuang are here, and Boss Qin is also here. I can't do anything to you. If you don't kneel, then go back and wait. I can compromise, but it depends on whether you are willing to kneel." This was Zhong Yongming's attitude, firm and unchangeable. Perhaps Li Tianlan not kneeling was the result he most wanted to see. Sitting on the other side, Gu Changjiang looked at Li Tianlan and then looked at Zhong Yongming. His eyes were playful, but he did not speak. Zhong Yongming was extremely angry, but Gu Changjiang was still rational. Now 4 of the 5 people who came here were scheduled, but one of them was the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, which was interesting. The situation was unclear, so Gu Changjiang could not speak. "Secretary Zhong, your request makes me see no sincerity in negotiation." Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's hand and said in a cold tone, "Boss Qin, do you mean that my son's life is not worth your man's kneel? But he is still alive. But what's the difference between him and being dead?" Zhong Yongming and Qin Weibai confronted each other tit for tat, and the momentum suddenly became oppressive. "All right." Li Tianlan suddenly opened his mouth and loosened his hand. His smile was gentle and calm. Looking at Zhong Yongming's increasingly cold eyes, he smiled and said, "Secretary Zhong, you are right. It's worth it." "The kneel," Zhong Yongming said in a cold tone. Li Tianlan took a step forward. "Tianlan, senior brother." Qin Weibai and Wang Yuetong spoke at the same time. Li Tianlan turned around and glanced at them. He smiled and narrowed his eyes. "It's really worth it, isn't it?" He turned around and walked directly to the bed. On the bed, Zhong Xiaofeng's eyes turned. He seemed to hear the conversation in the ward, and his breathing became rapid. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm. Whether Zhong Yongming's request was excessive or not, from different standpoints, there would be different interpretations. He knew very well that even if he did not kneel today, Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang would be willing to block some follow-up things for him. But there were some things that he could not afford to owe, the Li family could not afford to owe, and he did not want Qin Weibai to owe him. Since he could bear some things by himself, he must bear them by himself. Even if it crushed his spine, even if it crushed his knees. At least if it was just some humiliation, he could bear it and he could kneel. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan's back silently, bit her lip hard, and suddenly took a step forward. Dongqing Wudi directly stood in front of Qin Weibai. "Get out of my way." Qin Weibai's expression was cold. "Calm down." Dongqing Wudi's eyes were complicated. "You are Tianlan's woman, so you should respect his decision. Sometimes it takes more courage to kneel than to stand up straight. Like now." Bang. A dull voice sounded. Before Qin Weibai could speak, Li Tianlan's knees had directly knelt on the ground in front of the bed. As he said, he knelt in exchange for Zhong Xiaofeng's life. It was worth it. But the premise was that it was a whole life. Li Tianlan knelt in front of Zhong Xiaofeng with a calm face and even a hint of a smile in his tone. It was very light and soft, but in Zhong Yongming's ears, it was cold and even made his scalp tingle. Chapter 94. It's a little late to post the 7,500 chapters. I wish you a speedy recovery. During the days when Zhong Xiaofeng was hospitalized, Zhong Yongming had heard too many such words on the phone or in this ward. The son of the top leader of Huading was disabled. Too many people couldn't wait to express their concern. Which of those people who struggled in the system was not a real actor? His words were really sincere and warmed people's hearts. No matter on the surface or inside, there was no fault to be found. But when Li Tianlan knelt in front of the hospital bed and said this again, Zhong Yongming didn't feel hypocritical. Between the lines, what he heard from Li Tianlan's mouth was genuine sincerity and apology. How shrewd did he have to be able to do this? For a moment, the hair on Zhong Yongming's body stood on end. Looking at Li Tianlan kneeling in front of the hospital bed and seriously saying sorry and wishing him a speedy recovery, Zhong Yongming's heart became colder and colder, and the killing intent in his eyes became more and more naked and undisguised. From those sincere apologies, Zhong Yongming didn't hear any shame, anger, or unwillingness. Li Tianlan was kneeling on the ground and looking up at Zhong Xiaofeng on the hospital bed, but at this moment, Zhong Yongming felt that he was still standing straight and looking down at them. This feeling was subtle and obvious, but it was real. At least, Li Tianlan's kneeling did not bring Zhong Yongming pleasure, but strong uneasiness and fear. This young man's mind was too secretive, and he was also too patient. It was the first time Zhong Yongming had seen a person who could kneel under pressure and still be so calm. Not to mention anything else. Just his unfathomable shrewdness alone would be enough to cause him big trouble in the future if he succeeded. "Child Zhong, I'm sorry. I wish you a speedy recovery." Over and over again, Li Tianlan said it 10 times seriously. Then he turned his head, looked at Zhong Yongming, and said with a smile, "Secretary Zhong, can I get up now?" Zhong Yongming became more and more agitated. In any case, this young man must not be kept alive. Letting him go today was almost like letting a tiger go back to the mountain. Given a little time, who knew how far he would grow? Should he kill him at the risk of becoming enemies with Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi? Dongqing clan. Academics. Judging from the trend in the next 2 years, it was almost impossible for the Prince group to live in harmony with them. However, the game between groups and personal grievances were completely different. Thinking of Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang, Zhong Yongming hesitated, but on the surface, he remained indifferent and dignified. "Keep kneeling." Dongqing Wudi obviously frowned. Before he could say anything, Qin Weibai, who was staring at Zhong Yongming, suddenly broke out. Her voice was still cold and pleasant, but it became a little sharp. "Zhong Yongming, don't be so shameless. Reconciling with you today doesn't mean that I'm afraid of you. At worst, I won't stay in Zhongzhou State anymore. Outside the country, he can also enter the invincible realm. Do you really think you can cover the sky with one hand?" She took a deep breath. Her expression did not change, but her tone became sharper. At this moment, Qin Weibai did not have that dazzling dreamy look, but her whole person showed a kind of craziness and arrogance to protect her man at all costs. The two states were completely different, but they were both peerless in beauty. Zhong Yongming, you don't give me face, so I don't have to give you face. In Zhongzhou state I can't afford to offend you, but now I will say it only once. Help my man up from the bed of your useless son and apologize to him. I will count to 3. If you don't do it, the whole samsara will immediately go to war with your prince group, and it will not stop until one of us is dead. Everyone, including Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayong, changed their faces dramatically. This was no longer pure madness, but true hysteria. She would not stop until the prince group was dead. No one would doubt Qin Weibai's words. Qin Weibai had been in Huading for 5 years. Although she was not famous, people who knew her knew that Boss Qin always kept her word. Moreover, what happened on Mount Dibing in Beihai had also spread in Zhongzhou state. The master of Samsara Palace dared to fight with Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou state with serious injuries for her sister. She regarded the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast group as nothing. Why didn't she dare to go to war with the prince group? Samsara's industry in Zhongzhou state was extremely limited. When it was lost, the master of Samsara Palace, with the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld, would directly enter Zhongzhou state with the 12 supermasters and fight with the prince group to death. At that time, the whole Zhongzhou state would face a shocking change. And in such a grudge, not to mention what the Wang family of Beihai would do, even their closest ally, Kunlun City, might not do its best to help them. From the perspective of the whole Zhongzhou state, if the prince group suffered heavy losses, the current ruling group, the academics, would also be to blame. Are you threatening me? Zhong Yongming became furious after his face changed dramatically. He looked at Qin Weibai and asked in a cold tone. Qin Weibai ignored him and spoke again. Her cold and pleasant voice echoed in the ward, but it was like a curse of death and doomsday. Zhong Yongming looked hesitant. If what Qin Weibai said was true, once the Samsara Palace fought with the prince group to death, he might become a sinner of Zhongzhou state, not to mention anything else. A superpower that could have maintained a good cooperative relationship with Zhongzhou state became enemies because of his son. Even a director giant could not afford such a consequence, not to mention that he was a member of the decision-making committee. If things really got out of hand, no matter what happened to Samsara and Zhongzhou state in the future, he would have to bear the consequences. It would be a light punishment to be dismissed on the spot. 3. Qin Weibai strode forward. Her high-heeled shoes tapped on the floor of the ward firmly and crisply. Gu Changjiang, the director of the Huading Special Operations Bureau, who was completely confused by Qin Weibai's fierce reaction, finally reacted. He stepped to Zhong Yongming and said in a cold tone, "Boss Qin, you want to betray, smack?" Qin Weibai slapped Gu Changjiang directly in the face and said coldly, "Get out." The whole ward was quiet in an instant. Everyone had the same feeling. Qin Weibai, the spokesperson of the Samsara Palace, was completely crazy. Qin Weibai. Gu Changjiang covered his face. His face was unprecedentedly gloomy and ferocious, full of killing intent. Qin Weibai didn't even look at him. She took out her mobile phone and began to make a call without any hesitation. Zhong Yongming stared at Qin Weibai's fingers, and his expression changed. In any case, he could be regarded as the leader of Zhongzhou state. How could he apologize to Li Tianlan because of a threat when his son was disabled? He couldn't do this even if he died. Samsara had just destroyed Night Spirit. At this time, the master of Samsara Palace had a murderous weapon in hand, and the 12 supermasters were all loyal and strong. Now Samsara was indeed trying to win them over before finding out their details. But no matter how hard they tried, as a member of the decision-making committee, he would not apologize to the lover of a spokesperson of Samsara Palace when he was in the right. This was about the dignity of the entire Zhongzhou state. Even if it was a war. Zhong Yongming took a step back, pulled Li Tianlan up, and said in a deep voice, "Enough." Dongqing Wudi took a step forward in time and said, "Boss Qin, forget it. Everyone is here to solve the problem today. No one wants to make things worse, right? How about we each take a step back? Li Tianlan didn't say anything. He just came to Qin Weibai, reached out to take the mobile phone in her hand, touched her hair, and shook his head slightly. Qin Weibai, who had been arrogant, suddenly calmed down. She just looked at Zhong Yongming coldly and said nothing. Obviously, she was waiting for Zhong Yongming's statement. In this situation, even Dongqing Wudi was a little jealous. Li Tianlan had obviously become Qin Weibai's reverse scale. If he touched it, she would be furious. Such a peerless beauty protected him at all costs. How could this boy deserve it? How could he deserve it? Comrade Yongming, Tianlan has expressed his apology. How about we each take a step back and let bygones be bygones? Dongqing Wudi glanced at Zhong Yongming and said calmly. Although Qin Weibai's rage made everyone a little embarrassed, the following negotiation was much easier. I won't make trouble for him within 2 years. Zhong Yongming's tone was cold. In 2 years, the dust of the midterm election would settle. The rising Samsara Palace would presumably merge into the dark world again and be constrained by the superpowers. He would be one step closer then. And most importantly, even if Li Tianlan had grown in 2 years, he wouldn't be too terrible. At that time, he would deal with Li Tianlan as a giant of the decision-making committee. Who could protect him? 2 years. Dongqing Wudi thought for a while, looked at Zhong Yongming and said seriously, really? Zhong Yongming nodded with no expression on his face. He knew very well that it was difficult to go back on what he had promised in front of Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang. Within 2 years, even if he did something, he would never let anyone find out the evidence. In that case, Comrade Yongming, take good care of the patient. Goodbye. Dongqing Wudi nodded and shook hands with Zhong Yongming to say goodbye. Go? Where can you go? This woman slapped me. Are you just going to let it go? A cold and gloomy voice rang out, sounding somewhat deranged. Everyone in the ward frowned at the same time. What do you want? Dongqing Wudi glanced at Gu Changjiang and raised his eyebrows slightly. He was the marshal of Zhongzhou State and a member of the decision-making committee. In terms of rank, only Zhong Yongming could be on an equal footing with him in the whole ward. Gu Changjiang was just a lieutenant general. Even if he was a lieutenant general who enjoyed the treatment of a governor, Dongqing Wudi did not take him seriously. What do I want? Gu Changjiang sneered, his eyes ferocious. Marshal Dongqing, I'm the director of Huading's Special Operations Bureau of Zhongzhou State. Here, I represent the face of Huading's special warfare system. He patted his face and said in a colder tone, and now, my face has been slapped by a foreign force. Marshal, as the commander of the Border Praetorian Corps of Zhongzhou State, you ask me what I want. What's your position? Dongqing Wudi frowned and said indifferently, Boss Qin is a friend of Zhongzhou State. A friend? Gu Changjiang straightened up and sneered. I don't think so. When I go back, I'll write a report and submit it to Kunlun City. I think Qin Weibai has a serious tendency to commit treason. I'll question your political position and the political position of the Sky Academy to Kunlun City. Why does Kunlun City like to label others as treason? Li Tianlan suddenly asked in a serious and calm tone. Gu Changjiang was slightly stunned, but he did not think much about it. He just said coldly, What? You want to speak for people who have a tendency to commit treason? Are you qualified? Or do you also want to commit treason? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said calmly, You don't seem to be qualified to pronounce us guilty of treason, do you? Qualified? Gu Changjiang's smile was cold. In Huading, if I say you commit treason, you are a traitor. I know you, a genius with wind and thunder veins in this year's Sky Academy. From the standpoint of a senior, I advise you to correct your position. You'd better stay away from the woman around you. In the dark world, no one dares to fight against Zhongzhou State, let alone threaten Zhongzhou State. So what if the master of Samsara Palace is strong? Is she stronger than Li Kuangtu, the traitor 20 years ago? When Li Kuangtu attempted to defect to Annan State, wasn't he killed at the border? If the master of Samsara Palace dares to come to Zhongzhou State, she will end up the same. Li Kuangtu. This name had shrouded the high-level political life of Zhongzhou State like a dark cloud for many years. No matter people's impression of him was positive or negative, it was undeniable that he was indeed a rare genius in Zhongzhou State in the past 100 years. He practiced the peak chapters of the map of God of War and entered the Invincible Realm at the age of 35. When he just entered the Invincible Realm, he ranked among the top 5 on the divine list. He defeated Xue Qingming, a veteran expert of the Invincible Realm in Jade Pool, with 3 moves. Gu Xingyun, who entered the Invincible Realm at the same time, could not hold on for more than 3 minutes. He had a sword discussion with Lu Shengwuji, the master of Sword of East Island, and a battle with a giant of the Vatican. All these deeds showed that if Li Guangtu was still alive, he would be a peerless expert who was most likely to compete with Wang Tianzong for the first place on the divine list. Similarly, this was also the strongest traitor that Zhongzhou State had killed in decades. He had been dead for many years, but his martial arts still existed in the dark world. In the past 2 decades, few people could surpass him. The Samsara Palace was indeed in the limelight now. Even the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State had to show a certain degree of goodwill to maintain their relationship with the Samsara Palace. But showing goodwill did not mean fear. Qin Weibai did not know when to stop. Once the master of Samsara Palace insisted on going her own way, would the whole Zhongzhou State be afraid of a superpower in the dark world? It was a joke. Once Qin Weibai's attitude was spread today, presumably many high-level officials of Zhongzhou State would slightly change their views on the Samsara Palace. At the very least, some powerful figures would knock Qin Weibai down while showing goodwill. Gu Changjiang's eyes flickered. Although Zhongzhou State was now trying to win over the Samsara Palace, Kunlun City quite disliked this organization that was getting closer to Zhongzhou State. In recent years, the Academy and the Samsara Palace had more and more cooperation, while Kunlun City and the Prince Group had a tendency to drift apart. Under such circumstances, the cooperation between the Academy and the Samsara Palace would only harm the interests and actual power of Kunlun City more and more. If possible, it would be better to destroy the Samsara Palace when it just became powerful. Gu Changjiang's mind was full of cruel calculations, but he did not notice that as he spoke, Li Tianlan's eyes had suddenly narrowed. No matter what, you can't kill Li Guangtu. What do you have to show off? Li Tianlan said calmly. Humph, in that battle, although I didn't kill Li Guangtu, among the thunder-shocking scripture experts who besieged him, I was the first to hurt him. As soon as I saw him, I pierced his back. Gu Changjiang was thinking about how to use today's event to change the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State's view on the Samsara Palace. When he was absent-minded, he heard Li Tianlan's words and spoke subconsciously without thinking. When he was halfway through, he realized something was wrong and suddenly looked up. In his sight, almost everyone was looking at him with strange eyes. Li Tianlan's eyes had completely narrowed, and there was a sharp killing intent flashing in his eyes. Even his snow-white hair seemed to be burning, revealing a kind of extremely sharp sword intent. Gu Changjiang was shocked, but he calmed down instantly and felt a burst of chagrin. For the first time in decades, he was slapped in the face. The strong humiliation almost made him completely lose his mind. When he recalled what he had just said, he wanted to slap himself to death. There were some things that even if he wanted to do, he should never say it. And how could he talk about Li Guangtu, the taboo figure, when he was so excited? What was wrong with him? He was impetuous. He was impetuous. Li Tianlan's voice continued to ring in his ears. Among the people who besieged Li Guangtu, you were the first to hurt him? His voice was strange and seemed to be trembling, and there was a kind of almost uncontrollable killing intent. Traitors deserve to die. Gu Changjiang took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and said indifferently, Yes, traitors deserve to die. Li Tianlan chuckled. Traitors deserve to die, but who was the real traitor in the matter of that year? At this moment, Li Tianlan's mind was roaring, and the almost uncontrollable killing intent was surging wildly in his heart. Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's hand tightly. Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi looked at each other, and there was deep worry in their eyes. Seeing this scene, Gu Changjiang had a flash of inspiration. A guess that he had never thought of directly appeared in his mind, and instantly became extremely clear. Li Tianlan's surname was Li, a genius with wind and thunder veins. Samsara appeared inexplicably many years ago. A leader of the academics had entered the southwest border several times. Dongqing Wudi took over Li Kuangtu's position. Tribulation, the deputy governor of Sai City, suddenly appeared unexpectedly in the Sky Academy 2 days ago. Gu Changjiang's breathing became more and more rapid. He had never thought of this possibility before, but now that it appeared, everything seemed to make sense. Li Tianlan. Was he the successor of the Li family? In his sight, Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang still looked calm. But this calmness was different in Gu Changjiang's eyes. The academics, the Dongqing clan, Sai City, and the foreign Samsara Palace. If Li Tianlan was really the successor of the Li family, how many forces had he connected in such a short time? Gu Changjiang felt cold all over. There was the excitement of discovering a major secret, the panic of discovering the seriousness of the matter, and the joy of discovering the problem in time. He was glad that it was still early, and the key point of these forces, Li Tianlan, was far from growing up. Otherwise, when Li Tianlan entered the invincible realm, or even entered the thunder-shocking scripture, Kunlun City might face unprecedented challenges. Gu Changjiang's heart was beating wildly, but his expression was getting calmer and calmer. In any case, he had to tell the governor about it at once. He had to kill Li Tianlan at all costs. Once Li Tianlan died, the forces connected by him would naturally collapse, and then there would be nothing to worry about. I'll keep what happened today in mind. Gu Changjiang glanced at Qin Weibai coldly and said directly, "Goodbye. Let's go too." Li Tianlan took Qin Weibai's hand and said in a calm tone. They went out almost at the same time. Zhong Yongming, whose face was extremely gloomy, finally got up to see them off out of courtesy. They entered the elevator with their own thoughts, and the atmosphere was stiff. The elevator went straight to the first floor. Li Tianlan walked out of the elevator and suddenly said, "I need to go to the bathroom." Gu Changjiang took a deep look at him. He wanted to test something, but he was afraid of being suspected, so he simply turned around and left the hospital in a hurry. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that Li Tianlan might be the successor of the Li family. As long as he had this guess, the following investigation would not be very difficult. It didn't matter whether he tested or not. He walked out of the hospital and got into his Mercedes-Benz. He immediately took out his mobile phone and dialed Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City. The phone was turned off. Gu Changjiang frowned slightly and dialed Gu Xingyun's secretary again. The phone was still turned off. The dark world was in turmoil, and the busiest one was naturally the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Gu Xingyun spent most of his time in meetings, so it was normal that he could not be contacted. Gu Changjiang was a little hesitant, wondering if he should call Gu Qianchuan to tell him about it. He thought for a long time and finally shook his head gently. He said to the driver in front of him in a deep voice, "Go to the airport. I'm going back to Yuzhou, right now." The Mercedes-Benz started slowly and went straight to the airport. At the gate of the hospital, Zhuang Huayang, who was waiting for Li Tianlan to come back, was still holding Zhong Yongming's hand and smilingly asking him to visit the Sky Academy when he had time. Li Tianlan came back quickly. In less than 2 minutes, he walked from the direction of the bathroom to Qin Weibai and whispered, "Let's go." He politely shook hands with Zhong Yongming and said goodbye with an apologetic smile. He looked extremely sincere. They walked out of the hospital under Zhong Yongming's indifferent eyes. At the gate of the hospital, Qin Weibai, who had been holding hands with Li Tianlan, turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. She said reluctantly, "I'm leaving." Li Tianlan nodded silently. He hesitated and whispered, "How long will you be gone?" "About 3 months. So, Qin Weibai said softly. 3 months. Qin Weibai went to take care of the master of Samsara Palace. It took 3 months to recuperate with the body of an invincible realm expert, which showed that the master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured. Li Tianlan nodded gently and said nothing. "I'm relieved to have my sister take care of you." Qin Weibai smiled and looked at Wang Yuetong beside Li Tianlan. Her tone was soft. Li Tianlan's scalp went numb. He could not figure out what Qin Weibai meant. He could only watch her get into the car and leave without saying a word. Flaming fire drove through the rain and went further and further away from Li Tianlan. In the rain, everything behind became blurred. The light in the car was dim. Qin Weibai's face looked paler in the dim light. She took out a bottle of mineral water from the car and took a sip. She said calmly, "Is horsewoman's business done?" Flaming fire said, "She's already on her way to the airport." Qin Weibai said, at the gate of the hospital." Watching Qin Weibai's car leave, Zhuang Huayang finally said with a smile, "You two little guys, will you go back to the Sky Academy with me now?" He pointed to Wang Yuetong and said meaningfully, "These 200 credits are yours now." Li Dunlan was silent for a moment and suddenly said, "Headmaster, Marshal, who can lend me a car?" After Qin Weibai left, there were 2 cars left. Dongqing Wudi's black Land Rover and Zhuang Huayang's black Mercedes-Benz were both parked here. Dongqing Wudi was stunned. He subconsciously threw the car key in his hand to Li Tianlan and asked in confusion, "What else do you want?" "I suddenly remembered that I haven't taken something. I'll go get it." Li Tianlan smiled and handed the key to Wang Yuetong. "Let's go now. We'll go back to the Sky Academy after we get it." Wang Yuetong obediently said, "Oh," and walked to the Land Rover, purely like a well-behaved little wife. Li Tianlan nodded to Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang, then turned and walked to the Land Rover. The Land Rover slowly started, pierced the rain, and gradually went away. "This guy is really worrisome." Zhuang Huayang watched the Land Rover go farther and farther. He hesitated and said, "Follow him. Don't let him make any more trouble." In the passenger seat of the Land Rover, Li Tianlan's white hair was like fire, and he was as quiet as a mountain. "Senior brother, where are we going? What are we going to take?" Wang Yuetong asked subconsciously as she drove the Land Rover, which was a little cumbersome. "We still need a head. Let's go get it now," Li Tianlan said calmly. He took out his mobile phone and dialed the number of Lu Shuyuan, the head of the Curtain Intelligence Organization. At the same time, in the hospital ward, Zhong Yongming also returned to the ward with his secretary. After everyone left, this top leader of Huading, who had been extremely indifferent throughout, suddenly looked a little tired. The strong Qin Weibai, the calm Dongqing Wudi, the smiling Zhuang Huayang, the quiet and frightening Li Tianlan, even the cold Gu Changjiang's performance today was more confident than his. The situation was complicated. In the relatively transparent circle of politics, Zhong Yongming only felt mentally and physically exhausted. He returned to the ward silently. First, he glanced at the bed that seemed to be lifeless, then sat down on the sofa and lit a cigarette. The bed was quiet. Zhong Yongming, who took a deep drag on the cigarette, suddenly felt that something was wrong and suddenly stood up from the sofa. The bed did not seem to be lifeless. It was really lifeless. Zhong Yongming's heart sank. He quickly walked to the bed and lifted the quilt covering his son. In his sight, a large piece of smoking scarlet blood stained the white sheets, which was indescribably weird and horrible. Zhong Yongming staggered back a step and leaned against the wall. His eyes were ferocious and furious. On the bed, Zhong Xiaofeng was covered with blood, and he was already dead. A large amount of blood soaked his hospital gown, the bed sheet, and slowly dripped along the bed to the ground. Drip, drip. Zhong Xiaofeng's eyes were wide open, and there seemed to be some fear, anger, and unwillingness left in his dim eyes. Fresh blood flowed out of his entire body in an endless stream. Looking at his son's body, Zhong Yongming's lips trembled, but his heart was covered by an absolute chill. He gasped and his eyes were filled with fear. On Zhong Xiaofeng's body, forehead, left and right heart, left and right shoulder, left and right thigh, abdomen, throat, there were a total of 10 stab wounds. Blood was dripping. That was to say, just after he left, someone came back to the ward and stabbed Zhong Xiaofeng 10 times in a row. It was a kind of downright cruel and vicious. Zhong Yongming suddenly thought of Li Tianlan, who left the hospital for 2 minutes and said he wanted to go to the bathroom. His eyes narrowed, and his fingers holding the cigarette trembled violently. In his decades of life, facing his son's body, his first feeling was not anger or hatred, but fear. A kind of fear that came from the soul. He didn't know what the 10 stab wounds in front of him meant. He only knew that in front of this bed, or even just a few minutes ago, Li Tianlan knelt here and said sorry 10 times in a row. 10 stab wounds. The wounds were ferocious. The dark red and mournful blood flowed down the bed. Every drop of blood seemed to tell Zhong Yongming that the young man could bear the humiliation he gave him just now. But he could also kill in the place where he couldn't see. He killed decisively. Zhong Yongming slowly sat on the ground against the wall and kept muttering to himself, "This beast, this lunatic, I really don't want to write this kind of chapter in the middle of the night." Although there are 2 chapters a day in Special Warfare, they are basically big chapters. One chapter can cover 2 chapters. So, I really tried my best. Dear readers, if you can give me a subscription, just give me a subscription. I don't ask for a tip, just a subscription. A few yuan a month is enough. Chapter 95. Chapter 2. Try to be done before midnight. Coming out of the hospital, the downtown area of Huading was already stormy. The continuous rain for several days seemed to have entered the final outbreak period. The dense raindrops pattered on the car window, and everything in sight became more and more blurred. The wind whistled through the urban area, and the fallen leaves danced in the mournful and moaning wind. Looking at Huading, which was raining all over the city, from the window, a particularly cold feeling came over them. The black Land Rover was parked on the side of the road. Li Tianlan sat quietly in the car, watching the wind and rain outside the window in silence. There was a crossroad in front of him, and the traffic was moving back and forth. The target vehicle had long since disappeared without a trace. Li Tianlan pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and smoked silently, waiting for the information he needed. The Liu family was indeed a good dog. No matter how strong their inner resistance was, at least the Curtin Intelligence Organization was useful. This intelligence organization had been developing in Huading for decades, and its network had long covered the streets and alleys of Huading. How terrifying was an intelligence organization that had absorbed the financial resources of a wealthy family for decades without expanding outward. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as the Liu family was still in Li Tianlan's hands, at least in Huading, Li Tianlan would not be weaker than anyone in terms of intelligence. So even if the target was lost, Li Tianlan was not worried at all. He just needed to wait for the curtain to lock on again. "Senior brother, you want to kill Gu Changjiang?" Sitting in the driver's seat, Wang Yuetong tilted her head and looked at Li Tianlan. Her tone was complicated. She even felt that Li Tianlan was a bit abnormal. Who is Gu Changjiang? The director of Huading Special Operations Bureau, a lieutenant general of Zhongzhou State who enjoyed the treatment of a governor, could be said to be the representative of the special warfare system in Huading. How could such a person be killed so easily? He deserves to die. Li Tianlan smoked and said softly, "Today is the best chance. If we don't kill him today, we may have to wait for a long time." He hadn't taken the whole Immortal series yet. At this time, his realm was still in the subtle state of one thundershocking realm and one chi-controlling realm. Before he recovered his peak strength, this could be said to be his strongest moment. He really didn't want to let go of such a good opportunity. Gu Changjiang deserved to be killed regardless of his identity or standpoint. Li Tianlan also regarded killing Gu Changjiang as the last battle for him to step one foot into the thundershocking realm. After Gu Changjiang's death, it was time for him to go back to the Sky Academy to cultivate himself. Was he the first person to injure my father out of the group of experts that had besieged him? Li Tianlan smiled, but his eyes were cold without any warmth. But Wang Yuetong opened her mouth, wanting to say something but stopped on second thought. After knowing Li Tianlan's identity, she could completely understand Li Tianlan's killing intent. But Gu Changjiang was not an ordinary expert in the ice-condensing realm or the fire-flaming realm, but an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. An expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm from Kunlun City was different from other experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. In the same realm, due to the difference in absolute arts and inheritances, there might even be a huge difference in combat power. Gu Changjiang's aptitude was relatively average. About 5 years ago, he broke through the stabilization phase of the thundershocking realm and barely entered the peak phase. Then he was transferred to the Huading Special Operations Bureau as the director. It could be assumed that this was the peak of his life, and the possibility of him going further in martial arts was extremely small. But the key was that he was one of the hardcore confidants of Gu Xingyun, the god of war in Zhongzhou State. He had inherited all his unique arts. The name of Kunlun City had appeared in Zhongzhou State for only 20 years, but the Gu family had been one of the strongest martial arts forces in Zhongzhou State for hundreds of years. Their supreme unique arts, the 10 skills of true martial arts, were even said to be on par with the 24 moves of sword. Although Gu Changjiang's aptitude was slightly poor, he had inherited all the skills of Kunlun City, so Wang Yuetong was a little worried about Li Tianlan killing him. For a moment, she even hesitated whether to drive. Anyway, the idiot beside her couldn't drive. If she left the car, he couldn't do anything. "It's okay." Li Tianlan looked at Wang Yuetong and said slowly, "I know what to do." The text message prompt sounded on his mobile phone. Li Tianlan glanced down, narrowed his eyes and said, "Go to Lanxiao Airport, faster." Wang Yuetong hesitated, but still stepped on the accelerator. She drove the Land Rover that she was not used to and went straight to the airport. At the same time, in the Lu family's manner, Lu Shuyuan, whose face was a little pale, silently sent the text message. After a moment of silence, he frowned and said, "He wants to kill Gu Changjiang?" Lu Tianjing, the old mayor of Huading, looked at the teapot in front of him, meticulously watched the fire, and said calmly, "It has nothing to do with us." Lu Xun glanced at his uncle with a complicated expression and said nothing. On the night Li Tianlan came to the manor, he was seriously injured by Li Tianlan almost as soon as they met. When he woke up from a coma, the Lu family had handed over their biggest secret, the Imperial Jade Seal. Everything had become a foregone conclusion and could not be changed at all. Of course, Lu Shuyuan was not reconciled to it. His brother and son were all killed by Li Tianlan, and now he had to be Li Tianlan's dog. Everything in the Lu family had fallen into Li Tianlan's control. In such a terrible situation, he was unable to resist, which was what made him most desperate. "We have no choice." Lu Tianjing poured a cup of tea for his nephew with a poker face and said slowly. Lu Shuyuan was silent. He didn't blame his uncle for compromising. In the face of the survival of the whole family, the deep hatred in the past was not worth mentioning. It seemed humiliating and cruel to kneel and surrender to Li Tianlan, but under the circumstances, if they didn't kneel, they would die. Li Tianlan made it clear that he didn't mind dying with them. Under such an attitude, as long as the whole Lu family didn't want to die, they had no stand to uphold their dignity. This extremely rational approach saved the Lu family, but the point was, "Uncle, what should we do in the future?" Lu Shuyuan finally spoke in a bitter tone. "Let's take it one step at a time." Lu Tianjing sighed deeply and looked a little confused. In the current situation, it was unrealistic to get rid of Li Tianlan's control, unless Lu Shuyuan could enter the invincible realm in one day and suppress everything with absolute strength. By then, even if Li Tianlan exposed the Imperial Jade Seal, the Lu family would have the confidence to deal with it. This was the only way, but it was also the most impossible way at present. Take it one step at a time? Lu Shuyuan smiled bitterly. Today, Li Tianlan asked for Gu Changjiang's whereabouts, and he gave it to him. Who knew what Li Tianlan would ask for tomorrow? As his demands grew, the relationship between the Lu family and Li Tianlan would become closer and closer. They were now an important part of Kunlun City, but Li Tianlan's identity would make him the mortal enemy of Kunlun City in the future. The Lu family would be caught in the middle. If they were not careful, they would be doomed eternally, and they wouldn't even have a chance to struggle. Be the master's dog and don't resist. This is the only way. A calm but seductive voice sounded and spread through the living room. Lu Dongyu came downstairs and looked at her grandfather and father, her tone calm. But the harsh word, master, instantly hurt Lu Shuyuan's sensitive nerves, and his face turned red because of extreme humiliation. He clenched the teacup in his hand and suddenly stood up. He looked at Lu Dongyu and shouted angrily, "Do you want to be a dog so much? Don't forget that it was the so-called master you mentioned who killed your brother and your second uncle." Lu Dongyu walked down the stairs and stood quietly in the living room with a calm expression. Obviously, she had dressed up carefully. She wore light makeup, and her mouth was bright and attractive with lipstick evenly applied. She wore a light-colored sweater with tassels hanging on the chest, and the hem was tucked into a light gray narrow skirt. A pair of calves in black stockings had smooth lines, extending all the way down. She wore a pair of silver stiletto heels nearly 10 centimeters on her small feet. She stood there casually, but her figure was vividly reflected. Mature, proud, and seductive. At this moment, Lu Dongyu's face was expressionless, but her whole body exuded a kind of beautiful and charming woman. She glanced at her father and said calmly, "I haven't forgotten, but does it make sense to say this now?" Lu Xuyun looked at his seductively dressed daughter, and he was so angry that he blacked out and couldn't speak for a while. On the night Li Tianlan came, his baby daughter was the first to surrender to Li Tianlan. Everyone in the Lu family knew this. Although they all knelt in front of Li Tianlan in the end, there was still a gap between them and Lu Dongyu afterward. That feeling was like one was forced and the other was willing. Although the result was the same, the psychological feeling was completely different. Therefore, after Li Tianlan left, the relationship between Lu Dongyu and all the Lu family became subtle, and the father-daughter relationship with Lu Xuyuan even fell to the freezing point. "Don't you hate him?" Lu Xuyuan resisted the desire to slap his daughter in the face and said in a cold tone, "Hate." Lu Dongyu was stunned for a moment before she calmly spoke. As she spoke, a strange flush suddenly appeared on her face, and the black stockings wrapped around her narrow skirt slightly tightened her beautiful legs. She took a deep breath to ease the strange emotions in her body, but her voice still inevitably trembled a little, with a kind of undetectable charm. "But I know my identity, and I can see the current situation clearly. You obviously have no capital to resist, but you still remember the past hatred and want to fight back and retaliate. Don't you think it's ridiculous?" Lu Xuyuan couldn't bear it anymore and directly raised his palm. At the same time, Lu Dongyu raised her mobile phone and screamed, "If you dare to hit me, I'll call the master right away." Lu Xuyuan gritted his teeth and breathed rapidly, but his hand in the air seemed to be frozen and couldn't fall at all. "Enough!" Lu Tianjing flew into a rage. He slammed the teapot in his hand on the tea table and roared, "Look at you now! Are you still father and daughter? Bastard! Sit down." Lu Dongyu sat on the sofa without saying a word. Her enchanting and charming face was tightly taut, and her expression was cold. Smelling the fragrance of his granddaughter's deliberately sprayed perfume, Lu Tianjing became more and more agitated. He suppressed his temper, looked at Lu Dongyu, and said calmly, "Tell me what you think. Be a good dog. Only when the master grows up completely can we survive." The corner of Lu Tianjing's mouth moved, but he couldn't say anything for a while. When Li Tianlan grew up completely, when he entered the invincible realm, and when he could give the Lu family enough protection, even if they betrayed Kunlun City, they wouldn't have to worry about revenge and survival. But the premise was that they had to be at ease as a dog before that, and they had to wait until that day. Lu Tianjing wasn't sure that he could wait until that day without being exposed. Even if he was sure, it was hard for him to accept being a dog for Li Tianlan from then on. If hatred is really so important, why did you kneel down in front of the master at that time? Lu Dongyu's red lips twitched. She stood up and said coldly, "When the Lu family just got rich, weren't we the dogs of Kunlun City? Now I'm a good dog, at least my descendants still have a chance to be human." She walked quickly out of the villa in high heels, and her voice became colder and colder. "If you can't see the situation clearly, you won't even have the chance to be a dog. You can take revenge, but don't let me know, or I'll tell the master at once to prove my loyalty." She opened the door of the villa, and her seductive figure walked straight out of the villa. It was raining heavily outside. Looking at the rain falling from the sky, Lu Dongyu's eyes became a little blurred. She naturally hated Li Tianlan, and she even gnashed her teeth with hatred. But what no one knew was that on the night Li Tianlan left the Lu family, Lu Dongyu lay in bed, thinking about becoming Li Tianlan's dog. In addition to resentment, there was also a kind of extreme excitement in her heart that she couldn't understand at all. His strength, his overbearingness, his indifference and straightforwardness. The unscrupulous spraying of blood, the whistling and invincible wielding of the silver spear. Every picture seemed to be teasing Lu Dongyu's nerves. The strong man who made her hate his guts was fermenting in her body like poison, even making her body tremble violently. This feeling was very shameful, and Lu Dongyu even felt that she was a psychopath. But she just couldn't control her emotions. That night, she changed 3 pairs of underwear in a row, and even changed the bed sheets in the end, but she still couldn't control her emotions and body. That feeling was like taking drugs. She cried and slapped herself in the face, but that feeling was getting stronger and stronger, and it tortured her to the point that she was better off dead than alive. Lu Dongyu didn't know what was wrong with her. She didn't even dare to see a psychiatrist. The heavy rain kept falling from the gloomy sky. Lu Dongyu gently raised the corner of her rosy and delicate mouth, a little self-deprecating. Maybe it was just like what her lover in Kunlun City said. She was a slut. Or the kind of slut to the bone. Her body stepped into the heavy rain, twisting her sexy and seductive body, and left directly. Out of the hospital, Gu Changjiang had been making phone calls. He called Gu Xingyun's secretary. The relationship between the internal personnel of Kunlun City was complicated. To the outside world, everyone was on the same side. But at the most critical moment, Gu Xingyun didn't dare to trust anyone, because his speculation was really of great importance. Once it became a fact, no one could imagine how big a wave it would set off in Zhongzhou State. There were so many things that could be used in this matter that Gu Changjiang could only choose to report to Gu Xingyun and let him get the first-hand information first. Since he couldn't get through the phone, he could only go to Yuzhou. In the back row of the Mercedes-Benz, Gu Changjiang dialed the number again with his mobile phone. He hesitated and wondered if he should call the governor's wife. He turned the mobile phone in his hand, finally gave a wry smile, shook his head, and said to the driver, "Drive faster." Perhaps it was because of a big secret in his heart. Gu Changjiang was always a little uneasy and even a little uneasy, which made his originally calm mood become anxious. The Mercedes-Benz sped up a little. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror and suddenly said, "Director, a Land Rover has been following us for about 10 minutes. Gu Changjiang was stunned and subconsciously turned his head. In his sight, a black Land Rover with a military license plate followed him unhurriedly. Its purpose was unknown. Dongqing Wudi's car? Gu Changjiang's eyes narrowed tightly, and he was a little puzzled. What was Dongqing Wudi doing? He was a little hesitant. For a moment, he didn't know whether to stop or speed up. With the secret in his heart, he began to worry about gains and losses. Inside the Land Rover, Wang Yuetong looked seriously at the Mercedes-Benz in the heavy rain ahead and said softly, "There are no cameras in front. Senior brother, you must be careful." "It's okay." Li Tianlan rolled down the window, threw the cigarette butt out and said calmly, "Speed up." Wang Yuetong hesitated and stepped on the gas pedal to the end. The black Land Rover engine roared, and the speed suddenly began to soar to the limit. In the back row of the Mercedes-Benz, Gu Changjiang's pupils shrank slightly. Feeling the fierce momentum of the black Land Rover, he said without hesitation, "Speed up and get rid of them." The distance between the two cars suddenly narrowed a little because of the acceleration of the front and the back. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm and demonic, and his white hair moved without wind. A large amount of sword energy spread in the car, and it was extremely condensed. 20 meters. Endless sword light flashed in Li Tianlan's eyes. In the high-speed Land Rover, his body suddenly moved, and his whole body directly broke the front windshield. The silver light flashed in the heavy rain. It broke the raindrops and tore the air. The human emperor became a sword, and the sword intent was like a rainbow. Li Tianlan held the sword with both hands, and his whole body seemed to turn into a sword light, rushing straight to the Mercedes-Benz 20 meters away. The 12th blade. Glamorous. The fastest sword move in the 24 moves of sword. He was fast, and the sword was fast. He and the sword became one. In the heavy rain, everything retreated, and only a sword light flew sharply, with the spirit of a rainbow. The crazy raindrops slanted with the sword. The rain did not fall, but rushed to the Mercedes-Benz ahead. Gu Changjiang subconsciously narrowed his eyes. In the heavy rain, there was no man or sword. In the heavy rain, only the sword intent was whistling up and down, and only the sword light suddenly lit up. A distance of 20 meters. The sword light just flashed, and Li Tianlan's figure had directly landed on the roof of the car. A large amount of sword rain fell on the Mercedes-Benz, and the car sprinted hard in the sword rain. But Li Tianlan's whole body was already filled with thunder light, and the sword edge was full. Swish! The sword edge covered with thunder light pierced the roof, and the thunder light spread wantonly in the car. Li Tianlan's strength was firm, and the whole roof was completely destroyed by the sword. Li Tianlan's eyes were cold and crazy. The first thundershocking realm expert who hurt Li Guangtu. The core figure of Kunlun City. How could he not die? How could he not die? They all deserve to die. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed, and the thunder light became more dazzling. He held the sword and stabbed it down again. Boom! There was a sudden roar on the highway. Gu Changjiang's car exploded in an instant. Fire, thunder, heavy rain, black smoke, and wreckage rolled in all directions in the airwaves. In the center of the explosion, Li Tianlan did not step back and raised his sword again. Ruthless, crazy, indomitable, and indomitable. The sword light had disappeared. Li Tianlan had disappeared. Under the curtain of rain, there was only a sharp light that was enough to tear the world. It tore the sky and the curtain of rain, ignoring everything and fearing nothing. That was the ultimate attack. No one and nothing could make this sharp light retreat half a step. Gu Changjiang was covered with sword light. His body retreated at an unprecedented speed, but the sword intent around him was getting stronger and stronger. This was the supreme unique skill of Kunlun City. The 7th style of 10 skills of true martial arts. 7 unique flowing lights. The sharp light in the center of the battlefield went all the way forward, sweeping everything. The clanging sound between heaven and earth shook the field. The wind and rain changed. When I draw my sword, everyone in the world is a nonentity. When I reach the peak, everything in the world is under my feet. The 15th blade. Samsara. This was the 15th blade in the Invincible Manual. For hundreds of years, the 15th blade only belonged to one person. In an instant, all the wind and rain disappeared, and so did the sword intent. Only that sharp gleam continued to spread out incessantly, as if it was the strongest martial will in several hundred years. Li Tianlan's figure appeared clearly and then quickly blurred. A figure that was sharp enough to shatter the world appeared in front of Gu Changjiang. He was tall and slender. In the illusory environment, all the sword intent between heaven and earth seemed to be swirling and whistling around him. Blood, slaughter, a vast battlefield, mountains of corpses. He didn't move at all, but one scene after another appeared clearly in his mind. He was invincible in the world. No one could stand in front of him. No one could stop his sword. In a trance, it seemed to be another era. He wore a golden mask and stood with a sword, but he had an eternal majesty that dared to shatter the world. The 15th blade. Samsara. Gu Changjiang was scared out of his wits. No matter how many years passed, the dark world would not forget this figure, and no one dared to forget it. Even if the Li family had long disappeared. Even if Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun had long fallen. But this figure with a golden mask, his statue still stood in Zongnanhai, still stood on the stage of formidable person in Mount Dibing of Kunlun North Sea, and even in Kunlun City. This was the ancestor who founded Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun and the 24 moves of sword. This was the Samsara of the Invincible Manual, the 15th blade that belonged to Li Tianlan alone. For hundreds of years, there had never been such a sharp edge between heaven and earth. The sword intent was chasing after the ancestor, a sword of Samsara. The heavy rain dissipated, and the illusory figure suddenly appeared and disappeared. The sharp light between heaven and earth condensed. Li Tianlan fell with his sword. All the sword intent broke out in an instant, as if the sky was falling. In the soaring sword light, the 7 unique flowing lights around Gu Changjiang were instantly shattered. The 20th blade. Shatter the firmament. The sword intent and unique skills that belonged to the ancestor. Everything was perfectly combined after hundreds of years of wind and rain. A sword momentum that seemed to shatter the world appeared and overwhelmed everything. The sword light swept through Gu Changjiang's neck. Blood rose to the sky with the sword intent. Li Tianlan grabbed Gu Changjiang's head and looked at his eyes, which were still open. His expression was calm. Bang! Gu Changjiang's headless body swayed and fell to the ground. Li Tianlan dropped the head in his hand and crushed it with one foot. His essence, qi, and spirit turned from extremely strong to extremely weak. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and slowly walked to the Land Rover in the rain. In the heavy rain, his voice sounded softly and firmly. Give me some more time and I will avenge you. I will avenge all of you, soon. Chapter 96. Shortly after leaving the hospital, Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang's cars followed Li Tianlan. The black Land Rover in front of them was one of Dongqing Wudi's exclusive cars. It had a military positioning device on it, so Dongqing Wudi had always been far away from Li Tianlan. In the heavy rain, the two followed the Land Rover through the traffic, stopping and going. When the car went farther and farther away from Huading, Dongqing Wudi finally noticed that something was wrong. What is this boy going to get? Dongqing Wudi said in a doubtful tone, This is not the way back to Yonghua Villa, is it? Not the way to use private cuisine either. Zhuang Huayang shook his head and frowned slightly. Li Tianlan's social connections in Huading were extremely simple. Apart from Qin Weibai and Yu Donglai, he didn't know anyone else. Where could he go now? The distance between the two cars, one in front and the other in back, was about 800 meters. Dongqing Wudi followed them silently according to the location information. In the heavy rain, the Land Rover in front of him had already disappeared from his sight. Only the red dot on Dongqing Wudi's mobile phone screen was still flashing forward. It looks like they are going to the airport to see Boss Qin off. Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang looked at each other and said softly. They couldn't blame these two big shots in Zhengzhou State for gossiping too much. They were really worried about Li Tianlan now. His potential was enough to satisfy and even surprise the Dongqing clan and the academics, but his ability to cause trouble was also a headache. If it weren't for the turmoil in the dark world this time, Zhong Yongming's revenge in private would be a headache even if he didn't do anything on the surface. Now that things had come to an end, Zhuang Huayang just wanted to bring Li Tianlan back to the Sky Academy. It seemed that it would be better to let him come out after graduation. Boss Qin will take off from Wudong International, right? There are few Blue Bridge International flights, and most of them are domestic. Zhuang Huayang shook his head and didn't quite understand. In a word, this boy has troubled you in the past few years. We are relieved that you will take care of him in Huading. Dongqing Wudi handed Zhuang Huayang a cigarette and lit one himself. He took a deep breath and said, I'll try my best. Zhuang Huayang smiled and narrowed his old eyes. The academy will support him. Dongqing Wudi nodded slightly and was about to say something when he suddenly said, Why did it stop? Let's go and take a look. Zhuang Huayang's heart tightened as he said in a deep voice. The car instantly sped up and approached the Land Rover in front. The sound of a long sword clanging suddenly rang out in all directions. Through the heavy rain outside the window, through the carriage, it rang clearly in the ears of Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang. Their expressions changed at the same time. In their line of sight, the air in front of them did not seem to have changed at all. However, in that instant, the two of them could clearly sense that the seemingly motionless air seemed to have quietly tightened a little. The rain fell like a waterfall. A sharp light that shook the entire world suddenly appeared in the heavy rain. There was no thunder, no raging fire. There was only an absolute sense of danger left in the world. It was extreme madness and sharpness, a danger that could threaten any living being. Dong Chengwudi kicked open the car door and rushed straight to the battlefield. He seemed to be desperate and fearless of everything. Zhuang Huayang followed closely behind. That indistinct, clear, and mysterious sharpness appeared in an instant and disappeared almost instantly. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The rain curtain became calm again. Wang Yuetong jumped out of the car almost at the same time and rushed into the rain curtain. She had not entered the fire-flaming realm. The heavy rain falling from the sky instantly soaked her, but she ignored it and rushed to Li Tianlun. Looking at his increasingly pale face, she asked anxiously, "Senior brother, how are you?" "I'm fine." Li Tianlun shook his head. Although he was injured, it did not affect him much. He had never seen the 10 skills of true martial arts of Kunlun City, but Kunlun City could not become the power center of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State if it only had a conspiracy. So he did not underestimate Gu Changjiang from the beginning and went all out when he attacked. He used the 15th blade to reincarnate the ancestor's sword intent and the 20th blade to kill the enemy. It seemed to be 2 swords, but in fact it was 1 sword. The 12th blade approached Li Tianlun. The 15th blade began to accumulate power. The 20th blade killed the enemy. Everything happened in an instant. This was a real instant kill. All of his essence, qi, and spirit were concentrated in the sword, and he vented it out in the most thorough way, leaving no time for Gu Changjiang to react. If Gu Changjiang didn't die, he would temporarily lose his combat capability. At that time, he would be at Gu Changjiang's mercy. Li Tianlun coughed softly, and his eyes were like a deep pool, without any fluctuation. This was the most determined sword move of his killing intent. It was indomitable. In terms of state of mind, it was even more perfect than when he faced the attack of the black-robed man in the Sky Academy. In a trance, he seemed to have a new understanding of the invincible manual. The indomitable momentum that dared to break heaven and earth, make gods and demons bow their heads, and make all living beings kneel kept hovering in his heart, making his emotions and even his soul suffer. When I draw my sword, all things in the world and all living beings in the mortal world are like ants under my feet. Under my feet. The invincible manual, the 24 moves of sword, Zhuanyuantai's sword moved forward and tore heaven and earth apart. This was not just a simple momentum of martial arts, but a real spirit and even soul. In the heavy rain, the corners of Li Tianlun's mouth rose, and his smile was bright. The cold rain hit him, making him cold all over, but his heart was unprecedentedly hot. Starting from the beginning from the thunder-shocking realm, he found the meaning of recultivation for the first time. It was not a doubt about the realm, but an exploration of the purest martial arts. The cold wind and rain fell. Li Tianlun's eyes gradually brightened, and his smile was like a spring breeze. When this sword move was made, his heart seemed to be unprecedentedly comfortable. Let's go back to the Sky Academy. Li Tianlun took the initiative to take Wang Yuetong's little hand. In a short time, his state of mind seemed to be much calmer. He even reached out to pinch Wang Yuetong's delicate little nose and said with a smile, "What are you doing out here? Aren't you cold?" Wang Yuetong was happy and shy. Looking at Li Tianlun, who seemed to be out of character, her heart was in a mess. She coquettishly rolled her eyes at him, but did not know what to say. "Tianlun, how are you?" Dong Chengwudi rushed out of the rain at full speed, and the aura all over his body fluctuated violently. For a distance of hundreds of meters, he was completely desperate to rush forward. Now he rushed to the end, but he happened to see the scene of Li Tianlun pinching Wang Yuetong's nose. The god of massacre of Zhongzhou State suddenly felt a little bad. "Damn it, I came here at all costs. What did you show me? Marshal? Why are you here?" Li Tianlun raised his eyebrows slightly, but he did not let go of Wang Yuetong's hand. Dong Chengwudi forced down his messy thoughts. After all, everything in front of him looked calm and affectionate, but the momentum just now could not deceive people. He turned his eyes, looked at the wreckage of the car not far away, and looked at the body falling in the rain, and his eyes suddenly froze. On the shoulders of the dead man, 2 golden stars representing outstanding military exploits were shining, and they still shone with a charming brilliance in the heavy rain. "Gu Changjiang?" Dongqing Wudi's pupils shrank, and he suddenly turned to look at Li Tianlan. You killed him? He deserved to die. Li Tianlan said blandly. The corner of Dongqing Wudi's mouth twitched. After nearly 10 seconds of silence, he choked out a word from his throat, F***CK. He had just disabled Zhong Xiaofeng, and now he killed Gu Changjiang, one of the core figures of Kunlun City. This guy was simply a troublemaker. He turned his head, looked at Zhuang Huayang, who hurried over, and pointed to Gu Changjiang's body with a silent face. Zhuang Huayang looked along Dongqing Wudi's finger, and his eyes suddenly narrowed. The atmosphere in the heavy rain suddenly became silent. Gu Changjiang died in Huading. He was one of the confidants of Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State. His death was bound to make Gu Xingyun furious and even investigate to the end. All the experts who appeared in Huating during this time would become the targets of Kunlun City's investigation. If this matter was not handled well, there would be big trouble. If it was found that Li Tianlan killed Gu Changjiang, the consequences would be several times more serious than he disabled Zhong Xiaofeng. Fortunately, this place was relatively remote. During this time, no cars passed by, and few people knew Li Tianlan's current state. He should not be the object of suspicion of Kunlun City. This matter seemed to be done quite cleanly. Zhuang Huayang raised his eyebrows and suddenly said, "Have you got it?" Li Tianlan nodded calmly. All the wreckage of the nearby cars floated in the heavy rain without warning. The seriously injured and unconscious driver, Gu Changjiang's body, and even the blood on the ground all converged toward the wreckage of the cars. Zhuang Huayang waved his hand violently. In the heavy rain, a fire, almost against the common sense of physics, lit up in the wreckage, burning more and more fiercely. Subtle but bright lightning flashed in the wreckage. In a short while, all the wreckage and corpses had turned into a pile of black ash, which was washed away by the heavy rain and instantly scattered on the road. Go back to the Sky Academy. Zhuang Huayang, who destroyed the corpses, gritted his teeth, gave Li Tianlan a hard look, and turned away. He was so angry that he even forgot to say hello to Dongqing Wudi. Why don't you hurry over? What are you waiting for? Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly and looked at Li Tianlan. The death of Gu Changjiang was bound to make the extremely sensitive situation in Zhongzhou State more sensitive. As one of the members of the decision-making committee of Zhongzhou State and the leader of the giant group, he needed to consider much more than Zhuang Huayang. After returning to the Sky Academy, be more stable. Put aside the things outside. Tianlan, the most important thing is for you to grow up, which is also what many people are looking forward to. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath, looked at Li Tianlan, and said with gentle eyes. Li Tianlan hesitated, nodded, and said sincerely, "Thank you, General." Dongqing Wudi waved his hand and turned to look at his beloved car whose windshield had been broken. His eyes became more and more helpless. Li Tianlan was also a little embarrassed, so he took Wang Yuedong's hand and ran away directly. In the rain, Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang, who had not gone far, rang almost at the same time. Dongqing Wudi picked up the phone and listened. His face changed, and he subconsciously looked at Zhuang Huayang. Zhuang Huayang's body seemed to stagger. He turned around and stared at Li Tianlan fiercely. His eyes were full of love and anger. He was really worried about Li Tianlan. Faintly, Zhuang Huayang's angry and aggrieved voice sounded in the wind and rain. "Tell me, what else did you do?" Dongqing Wudi suppressed his laughter and got into the Land Rover. He started the car and left quickly. The rain poured into the passenger's seat through the windshield. The god of massacre of Zhongzhou State slapped the steering wheel hard and sang heroically against the wind and rain. Li Tianlan was already standing in front of Zhuang Huayang. In the face of the old headmaster's questioning, he subconsciously hummed and then said, "Oh, I went to the bathroom in the hospital and killed Zhong Xiaofeng. I said it was worth it for me to kneel down for his life." Zhuang Huayang was so angry that he felt dizzy. He said weakly, "I have a bad heart. What else did you do? Tell me. Don't let me hit you all at once, okay? Li Tianlan?" "Nothing." Li Tianlan shook his head and said honestly, "After going back to Yonghua Villa, I will go back to the Sky Academy with the headmaster. Don't worry, I did a good job on Zhong Xiaofeng. Zhong Yongming can't find anything. Zhuang Huayang shook his head with a wry smile. He knew that since Li Tianlan dared to do it, he had the confidence not to leave any evidence. But how would Zhong Yongming feel when facing his dead son? He had just promised not to trouble Li Tianlan within 2 years. But his son died in the blink of an eye. He was even stabbed to death 10 times. He couldn't get evidence, so he couldn't trouble Li Tianlan within 2 years. He suffered a great loss. Li Tianlan had set Zhong Yongming up. In the future, Zhuang Huayang shook his head subconsciously. What future? Now the top priority was to lock up Li Tianlan, the troublemaker. They sat back in the car. Zhuang Huayang started the engine and said calmly, Gu Changjiang shouldn't be killed. There are too many variables. There won't be any big problem with the Zhong family for the time being. One of the enemies who killed my father is in front of me. I can't bear it. And I also want to see if Kunlun City can show anything after Gu Changjiang's death. Li Tianlan sat in the passenger seat and said calmly, What's the point? I can understand that you want revenge, but you see this world too simply. You're simply childish. Zhuang Huayang shook his head and continued, Even if you enter the invincible realm now, even if you find out the truth of all the things that happened that year, and you know that Li Guangtu was wronged, what will you do? Do you want to go directly to Kunlun City and kill them? Take revenge? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and listened to Zhuang Huayang's teaching in silence. There are rules in this world. Zhuang Huayang said calmly, Wang Tianzong, as the first on the divine list, went to Kunlun Mountain a few days ago. He could split Kunlun City with one sword, but no one died under that sword. This is the rule. No matter how strong you are, you have to act within the rules. If you have enough strength to destroy Kunlun City directly, even if you are reasonable, so what? What will the higher-ups think of you? Zhongzhou State will definitely try its best to suppress you. It's a dream for the Li family to restore its former glory. All countries have the same view on invincible realm experts. You can be uncontrolled, but you must abide by the rules. Otherwise, you will become a public enemy. Is Wang Tianzong strong? But if the 100,000 elite troops of Zhongzhou State surround Mount Dibing, how long do you think he, the first on the divine list, can hold on? 400 years. Few people who don't abide by the rules have a good end. He drove, turned his head to look at Li Tianlan, and said calmly, You have to think clearly about when to do what. Now your biggest task is to grow up slowly. When you are strong enough, there will naturally be people waving flags and cheering for you within the rules. Force can't decide everything, but force is the route to solve everything. You don't have to care about anything else now. You just need to improve your strength. This is the only thing you can do. I agree with you, but not completely. Li Tianlan looked out of the window and said calmly after a moment of silence. Zhuang Huayang sighed softly and said no more. Outside the window, it was raining heavily. Li Tianlan's eyes were firm. This was a seemingly orderly world, but in fact, it was full of chaos. This was a circle full of gratitude and resentment, love and hatred, and deception. Force, power, and wealth could all find their own positions, and they emitted different lights in this circle, and finally formed a seemingly fragile but extremely stable balance. Some people attacked, some people defended, some people hid, demons and monsters, and some people were ambitious and ruthless. The storm rose, the storm fell, and the storm settled. There was a bloody storm and a lonely scene. Ups and downs, and all kinds of people were within the rules. In a sense, what Zhuang Huayang said was very reasonable. But throughout his life, Chapter 97. Yesterday, I was still saying in the readers' group chat that I would return to my hometown in advance to wait for news. I reckon it would only be a few days later. In the end, when I said that in the group chat last night, he left. I only came back in the afternoon. My mind is a little messy and it's affecting my train of thought. There are still 2 more chapters today, but it will be later. I'll be busy for another day after the burial tomorrow, so the update will be later, but it won't be less. After tomorrow, I'll adjust it and fix a time for the update. At the moment, I should be missing a chapter, but I'll make it up in the next few days. I hope everyone can understand. Bao. Chapter 98. In the number 3 VIP room of Lanqiao Airport, the fragrance of tea wafted in the air. Qin Weibai sat quietly on the sofa with a teacup in her hand. Through the window, she looked down at the flow of people below the airport without saying a word. The entire VIP room was silent. Inside the crystal teapot, the soft tea leaves swelled and floated upward. The water was gradually boiling. Flaming fire stared at the teapot in front of her intently. There was a hint of serenity in her eyes that she enjoyed very much. Horsewoman stood in a corner of the VIP room that was most suitable for protection and attack. Her tall and plump petite body stood straight, like a statue dedicated to her duty. Time passed slowly. Qin Weibai, who had been drinking tea in silence, did not change her movements, but the light in her bright eyes gradually became colder and sharper. The VIP lounge also seemed to be filled with a kind of pressure. It was not the sharpness and sword intent of martial arts, but a kind of aura that was emitted from the inside out. It did not make people feel dangerous, but it inexplicably made people feel nervous. Horsewoman moved her body uneasily. She wanted to say something but finally chose to be silent. Among the 12 supermasters of Samsara, Horsewoman ranked 6th, even higher than Flaming Fire. In Samsara Palace, she was originally the supermaster who had the closest relationship with Qin Weibai except for Flaming Fire. But now, it seemed that she was also the supermaster under the most pressure. It was all because of Qin Weibai's attitude toward her. The black-robed man attacked Li Tianlan at the Sky Academy. Li Tianlan's hair turned white instantly. Horsewoman did try her best to protect Li Tianlan. But Qin Weibai never cared about the process. She only cared about the result. And the result of this incident obviously made her impression on Horsewoman plummet. It was also because of this incident that their palace master led the 12 supermasters straight into Mount Dibbing after destroying Night Spirit and took Wang Tianzong's sword. They were seriously injured. Facing the Wang family of Beihai was originally outside the Samsara Palace's plan. In other words, if Horsewoman protected Li Tianlan, this incident could not have happened. The palace master was seriously injured. The boss was dissatisfied. In just a few days, Horsewoman's pressure could be imagined. The 12 supermasters of Samsara were not as close as brothers and sisters. They competed with each other. Except for Saint and Military Counselor, the other supermasters had their own thoughts and plans. For example, the contradiction between Duke and Flaming Fire was extremely acute. Before Flaming Fire joined Samsara, she was one of the great swordsmen of a certain Kendo sect in East Island. At the same time, she was also a famous Sakura ninja in East Island. At a high-level meeting of Samsara Palace, Duke once openly praised Flaming Fire's buttocks and face, saying that she looked like a popular actress in East Island. If Qin Weibai hadn't been tough enough to stop the tit-for-tat between them, they might have fought on the spot. After the incident this time, he failed to protect young Master Li General, who was ranked 3rd among the 12 Heavenly Kings, even begged his boss to replace him, saying that he would protect young Master Li's safety. He called him young Master Li without even seeing Li Tianlan's face. His flattery was really shameless. This would undoubtedly put more pressure on Horsewoman. She didn't care where she was, but a supermaster of Samsara who left a bad impression on her boss would certainly not leave a good impression on the palace master. That was the most troublesome thing. Horsewoman breathed softly and sat in the corner in silence. This time she could go back to Zhongzhou State with her boss, but when she came back next time, Horsewoman was not sure whether it would be her or General with the boss. Now she could only perform well and try to regain the boss's trust. How long will it take off? Qin Weibai suddenly asked in a cold tone. Horsewoman looked up at her watch immediately and replied, 2 more hours. Qin Weibai's shining eyes narrowed slightly and she said calmly, 5 more minutes. As soon as she finished speaking, a gentle knock sounded on the door. In the VIP room, Flaming Fire, who seemed to be absent-minded, and Horsewoman, who was indulging in flights of fancy, suddenly focused their attention. Qin Weibai held the cup motionlessly, looking cold and aloof. Her whole person was showing a kind of dreamy pride and amazement. The knock on the door still sounded softly and rhythmically. Horsewoman, who was closest to the door, took a deep breath, gathered all her energy, qi, and spirit together, and walked over to open the door. A handsome middle-aged man, who was the closest to the door, took a deep breath, gathered all his energy, qi, and spirit together, and walked over to open the door. The man was in his early 40s. He was well-dressed, and his smile was natural and kind. But Horsewoman suddenly felt the hair all over her body stand on end. The other party's face was undoubtedly extremely handsome, but his handsome appearance did not give people the slightest feeling of comfort, because his gaze was too strange. It was a pair of very bright eyes, but in the twinkling of divine light, people could always read countless conspiracies and darkness from them. Standing in front of him, Horsewoman could not feel any sense of oppression from an invincible realm expert. All she could feel was coldness. In front of him, Horsewoman could only be vigilant and alert. "Let him in." Qin Weibai's voice sounded from behind. It was neither fast nor slow, calm and calm. Horsewoman made way with no expression on her face. Watching the man's body walk into the VIP room, she subconsciously got closer to Qin Weibai. For the behind-the-scenes master of Hanyu Palace in Huading, she could never be too vigilant. Although today's meeting was sudden, in a sense, it could also be said to be the meeting of the number 2 figures of the 2 superpowers in the dark world. Qin Weibai, the external spokesperson of Samsara Palace. Jiang Qinyan, the number 2 figure of the Jiang family of South America. In a meeting like this, anything was possible. So Horsewoman's nervousness and vigilance at this time were completely out of instinct. "Are you waiting for me?" Jiang Qinyan walked to Qin Weibai and looked at the dreamy woman in front of him, who was like the most beautiful scenery. His eyes, which always flashed with darkness and conspiracy, seemed to soften quietly. In the eyes of different people, Qin Weibai seemed to always be different. In the eyes of those in power, Qin Weibai was the external spokesperson of Samsara Palace, who was below one person and above all others. She was cold, strong, and domineering. When the mysterious master of Samsara Palace was silent, Qin Weibai was the only will of the entire Samsara Palace. Among the super masters of Samsara Palace, Qin Weibai was a clear and blurry figure. Everyone could see her, but no one could get close to her. She was sitting here, very close, but the feeling of being far away was unusually clear. In the eyes of the super masters, Qin Weibai was not unattainable, but she was unreachable. She seemed to be unintentionally keeping a distance from everyone. In Li Tianlan's eyes, Qin Weibai was a woman who belonged to him. No matter in bed or out of bed, she was obedient to him, a woman he could desecrate and love at will. Relatively speaking, in the eyes of ordinary people, Qin Weibai was a calamity that could bring disaster to the country and the people. Such a woman was really pleasing to the eye, but she could only be pleasing to the eye and did not dare to have any other intentions. In the eyes of some relatively young big shots who had already stood at the peak, had power, force, wealth, and power, Qin Weibai was a goddess they dreamed of and wanted at all costs. Zhong Yongming's former spokesperson in the Grey Realm, Zhong Yue, was like that. Wang Xiaoyao of the Wang family of Beihai was like that. So was Jiang Qinyan, the second in command of the Jiang family with the code name Black Hand, an invincible realm expert. For them, Qin Weibai, who was cold and dreamy, was simply the most fatal temptation. Her identity, her beauty, her temperament, her power, these were all things that were enough to make their blood boil and their hearts beat faster at the thought of them. She was the most perfect woman, a woman worthy of their pursuit by all means. Jiang Qinyan's first formal meeting with Qin Weibai was in Fog City 2 years ago, and that was the only time they met. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes, but Jiang Qinyan seemed to be possessed. For 2 years, he spent a lot of time collecting all the information about Qin Weibai, her hobbies, her photos, and everything about her. She even proposed marriage to the Samsara Palace in the name of the Jiang family. As long as Qin Weibai could follow him, The Jiang family was willing to pave all the way for the Samsara Palace in South America and even lend the murderous weapon, the Legend of Qin, to the Samsara Palace 3 times. 2 conditions, each of which represented naked sincerity. As long as he could get Qin Weibai, Jiang Qinyan was even willing to pay more. His kindness to the Samsara Palace was quickly responded with a simple word: "Get out." This response came from Qin Weibai, and the entire Samsara Palace acquiesced at the same time. Jiang Qinyan didn't mind. Instead, he had a fighting spirit that grew stronger with each setback. No matter what, he had to get this woman, his goddess. Jiang Qinyan couldn't tell whether it was possessiveness or true love. The only thing he could be sure of was that he was willing to marry her and give her everything he had. If he couldn't get her after giving everything, he would completely destroy her. "I'm waiting for you to give me an explanation." Qin Weibai sat on the sofa and said flatly, "How do you know the black-robed man?" Jiang Qinyan looked at Qin Weibai's face seriously and asked seriously. There was a trace of fascination in his cold eyes that he didn't even realize. It was only when they were talking business that he could look at Qin Weibai's face seriously without feeling too much pressure. This woman was like a goddess in his heart. Most of the time, he could feel her overwhelming charm even through some photos. "Does it matter?" Qin Weibai replied without looking up, and her tone grew colder. "Of course it matters." Jiang Qinyan looked at Qin Weibai and said softly, "The black-robed man was a secret in the Jiang family. Many people knew of his existence, but after what happened that year, few people in the organization knew what the black-robed man looked like. It was incredible that Qin Weibai could recognize him just by looking at the black-robed man's body." Qin Weibai didn't speak. She held the teacup coldly, with a kind of pride that kept people 1,000 miles away. Jiang Qinyan took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Then he continued to smile and said, "Where are you going?" "At first, I thought you were going to Wudong International Airport to take off." Qin Weibai still said nothing. The location of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace was still a mystery in the dark world. The intelligence organization of Zhongzhou State was pervasive. Even if she wanted to go back to the headquarters, she couldn't go back directly in Zhongzhou State. There were direct flights to East Island from Lanqiao Airport. There, Flaming Fire, who was born in East Island, could make a proper arrangement to get rid of anyone's searching eyes. Now the Samsara Palace was gaining momentum, but the palace master was seriously injured. They had to be more careful. What if I say the black-robed man is not a member of the Jiang family? Seeing that Qin Weibai didn't speak, Jiang Qinyan narrowed his eyes and said with a chuckle, "The body you sent over has nothing to do with me. Little Bai, you can't prove it, can you?" He didn't like the feeling of being led by the nose, even if this person was the woman he wanted. From the moment the black-robed man's body appeared in Hanyu Palace, he knew that he had to give the Samsara Palace an explanation. But if he compromised so simply, what was the Jiang family? If he didn't provoke Qin Weibai verbally, Jiang Qinyan would feel a little uncomfortable. "Then you can go." Qin Weibai put down the teacup in her hand and looked at Jiang Qinyan with clear and cold eyes. "The Samsara Palace wants an explanation. Since you won't give it, we can only go and get it." Jiang Qinyan narrowed his eyes slightly. For the first time, his eyes finally recovered the fierceness and coldness of an invincible realm expert. His tone was still gentle, even gentle. "Little Bai, I'm afraid it's not so easy to get the explanation you want, is it? The Samsara Palace has just become powerful, and its strength is still weak. I know you are now close to the academics, but even in Zhongzhou State..." He shook his head slightly and his eyes were playful. "Gu Changjiang, Gu Tonghe, Gu Yunqi, Gu Fenghua." Qin Weibai handed the teacup to Flaming Fire and calmly said 4 names. Jiang Qinyan's face remained unchanged, but in his narrowed eyes, his pupils suddenly contracted, and he looked at Qin Weibai solemnly. "Little Bai, what do you mean?" Jiang Qinyan asked calmly. "Nothing." Qin Weibai shook her head and responded in a light tone. But Jiang Qinyan felt more and more uneasy. The 4 names that Qin Weibai said were famous throughout Zhongzhou State. Gu Changjiang was the director of the Huading Special Operations Bureau, Gu Tonghe was in charge of the Beijiang Special Operations Bureau of Zhengzhou State. Gu Yunqi was the leader of the Tibetan Special Operations Bureau. As for Gu Fengbue, his identity was even more prominent. 2 years ago, he went one step further in the Nanyun Special Operations Bureau. Now he was one of the deputy governors of Kunlun City. He assisted Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhengzhou State, in handling the daily affairs of the special warfare system. He was Gu Xingyun's real right-hand man. For people. For at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Gu Fengbue, in particular, was at the full closure of the thunder-shocking realm and had even touched the threshold of the half-step invincible realm. Kunlun City was full of talents and experts, but that was the power that belonged to the entire Kunlun City. The 4 generals under Gu Xingyun's command all belonged to his personal power. Jiang Qianyan had heard of the names of these 4 people. Just yesterday, he heard Gu Qianchuan, the first elder of Kunlun City, mention them. The first elder, who had become more and more impatient in recent years to regain the orthodox status of Kunlun City, had secretly been in closer contact with the Jiang family in recent years. As the second in the Jiang family, Jiang Qianyan could naturally understand that the experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm mentioned by Gu Qianchuan yesterday were the 4 biggest stumbling blocks on his way to power. Although he didn't ask for anything explicitly, Jiang Qianyan knew what he was thinking when he said the 4 names. As for what to do, Jiang Qianyan was still hesitating. He didn't expect that Qin Weibai would mention the 4 names before he made up his mind. How did she know? What else do you know? Jiang Qianyan asked in a deep voice. I don't know much, but it's enough to get an explanation. Qin Weibai looked at her watch, and a trace of impatience gradually appeared on her delicate face. Jiang Qianyan's gradually tensed body relaxed again, and he chuckled. I don't think it's enough, little Bai. There are some things you don't understand. Even if you really know something, I haven't done it yet. What can you do? What hasn't happened is no threat to me. Qin Weibai lifted the corner of her mouth with a faint smile. I know your Jiang family's wild ambition. You want to fish in troubled waters in Zhengzhou State, and even try to restore your former status. You stir up trouble in Huading. Do you know if others are active in other places? For you, there is a famous saying in the history of Zhengzhou State. Everyone in Zhengzhou State knows it. I think you know it, don't you? Jiang Qianyan's face was stiff, and he was silent. Victory is inseparable from Chuan, and failure is inseparable from Tai. Qin Weibai's slender fingers gently tapped the rim of the cup, and she said flatly, I heard an old monk say that there is a saying about accumulating luck. In metaphysics, there is a name called gathering dragon soul. Accumulating for a long time, one can achieve a dragon-like atmosphere and soar to the 9th heaven. In terms of feng shui, Dragon Gate Mountain in Tianfu Province is the head of the dragon. Tianfu Province should be the object you should pay most attention to, right? Second Master, is there a secret in Dragon Gate Mountain? If you want to create a dragon-like atmosphere, Tianfu Province and Sinan City seem to be your only choice. In the VIP room, the surging killing intent suddenly rose. Jiang Qianyan's face became completely cold, and his eyes flashed with killing intent. Horsewoman and Flaming Fire were completely tense, and their hearts were already nervous to the extreme. Only Qin Weibai was still calm and collected. It's ridiculous. Jiang Qianyan suddenly opened his mouth, and his killing intent suddenly disappeared. He laughed at himself and said, We are laughing at Kunlun City, laughing at the Wang family of Beihai, laughing at these top families and forces that there will be internal strife and moles. But we didn't expect that in our Jiang family, there are also villains who will not hesitate to sell the family's core secrets in exchange for benefits. He took a deep look at Qin Weibai and whispered, The intelligence system of samsara is really amazing. I admire it. He paused and asked straightforwardly, Tell me, what does samsara want? I'm flattered. Qin Weibai said calmly, I have 2 requirements. First, I don't care what you want to do with Tianlan's death. Put it aside first. You must keep his identity a secret. Second, I want 2 places in the Jiang family. Which 2 places? Jiang Qianyan narrowed his eyes. It was easy to keep a secret for Li Tianlan. Now the situation in Zhengzhou State was chaotic, and the hidden dangers inside Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai were on the verge of breaking out. If he wanted to fish in troubled waters, he didn't have to use Li Tianlan now. On the contrary, knowing his identity would become a card in his hand. When the right opportunity came out, it might have unexpected effects. It was okay to keep a secret for him for now. The key was the two places Samsara wanted. Samsara, which had gotten the murderous weapon, gradually grew stronger. Did they want to take advantage of the situation to enter South America? Just two small places. Qin Weibai said slowly, Hanyu Palace in Huading. Mingyue Garden in Lin. My man's birth destiny has some small problems. These two places are very important to him. Jiang Chenyan's face changed and became extremely ugly. Hanyu Palace. Bright Moon Garden. These two places looked inconspicuous, but in fact, they were the two nodes for the Jiang family to gather the Dragon Soul in Zhengzhou State. Now the Dragon Soul had been mostly completed, and the luck of the Jiang family was booming. Only the Dragon Head of Dragon Gate Mountain in Tianfu Province was needed to take shape. At this time, although they could give up Hanyu Palace and Bright Moon Garden and choose two new nodes, it would be troublesome to do so, and the choice of nodes would be worse than that of Hanyu Palace and Bright Moon Garden. Have you heard of gathering the Heavenly Spirit? Qin Weibai glanced at Jiang Chenyan and took the initiative to ask. Jiang Chenyan's expression changed slightly and he nodded. Gathering the Heavenly Spirit was also a name in metaphysics. It was different from gathering the Dragon Soul. Gathering the Dragon Soul was to gather the luck into momentum, creating a dragon-like atmosphere that soared to the ninth heaven. Gathering the Heavenly Spirit was to gather the luck to change one's fate against heaven's will. This was almost a taboo method that had touched the secrets of heaven. Those who dared to play this way would probably not end well in the end, or even be punished by heaven. My man needs these two places. Qin Weibai said calmly, it's about his fate and even his survival. Whoever doesn't let him live well, I'll let him die miserably. Hanyu Palace, Bright Moon Garden. I have to have these two places. As for the future, your gathering the Dragon Soul has nothing to do with me. To some extent, the civil strife in Kunlun City and even in the Wang family of Beihai is good for me. Jiang Chenyan's eyes lit up slightly and he said subconsciously, how about we cooperate? Qin Weibai glanced at him and didn't even bother to speak. Her refusal was extremely obvious. Well, I can promise you. Jiang Chenyan pondered for a while and said calmly, I will transfer the ownership of Hanyu Palace and Bright Moon Garden immediately. But this is not the Jiang family's compromise with Samsara, but my concession and contribution to my beloved woman. Your beloved woman? Qin Weibai said coldly, the woman you love is sacrificing for the man she loves. Don't pretend to be infatuated here. It doesn't make sense. I won't thank you because I deserve it. I don't need to thank you. Jiang Chenyan chuckled, but his eyes were burning with the color of madness. He stared at Qin Weibai's face. Other men can conquer you, and I believe I can too. One day I will get you. If I can't get you, I will destroy you and your man. I mean it. Qin Weibai took a sip of tea gracefully and said in a mocking tone, you can only say that now. There was another sentence that she didn't say and couldn't say. In a few years, what would you, Jiang Chenyan, be? Jiang Chenyan looked at Qin Weibai in silence. His eyes grew crazier and softer. You can go now. Qin Weibai's tone was proud and indifferent. Jiang Chenyan's eyes flickered slightly. For the first time, there was a trace of bitterness and jealousy in them. His figure slowly disappeared in the VIP room. Only his voice still echoed in the VIP room, light and melancholy. Everyone has feelings. It's better not to meet a beautiful woman. Qin Weibai looked at her watch, expressionless. Flaming Fire poured Qin Weibai another cup of tea and continued to be silent. Flaming Fire. Qin Weibai picked up the teacup and suddenly spoke. Boss. Flaming Fire's meticulous voice sounded calm and respectful. It's really boring to be the palace master sister, isn't it? Qin Weibai whispered. Flaming Fire's face changed and she was silent for a moment. Chapter 99. This was yesterday's second update. Back to the Sky Academy, Li Tianlan, who had been drowsy all the way, finally managed to recover some of his spirit and physical strength. After the sword strike that exhausted his essence, qi, and spirit, Li Tianlan's body was indescribably empty, but also indescribably comfortable, like a person who had not rested for a long time lying comfortably in bed, half asleep and half awake. Outside the window, the heavy rain sprinkled on the roof of the car, with a delicate and manic rhythm. When the car stopped, Li Tianlan opened his eyes in a daze, only to find that he had returned to the riverside, back to the place where he was attacked by the black robe. Li Tianlan looked through the car window. 2 consecutive days of heavy rain had already washed the battlefield clean, only the nearby destroyed woods still had traces of the battle. He shook his head subconsciously, grasped the whole set of immortality potion in his hand, and felt a little emotional. In just a few days, both his fate and state of mind seemed to have experienced a great rise and fall, and his mentality had also undergone some subtle changes. "What's your plan?" Zhuang Huayang parked the car on the shore and opened the door. Heat waves rose in the cold wind and rain. Although there was no fire, the rain within the range of the car disappeared in an instant. The 3 of them stepped on the white bridge on the shore and walked to the Sky Academy. Zhuang Huayang asked casually, "Eat this first, I need to meditate." Li Tianlan lifted the box in his hand and said, this was something that could completely heal his injury, and it was also the meaning of his return to the Sky Academy. Li Tianlan was now very clear about his state. The sword strike that killed Gu Changjiang in the rain gave him too much inspiration. In this state, with the help of the immortality potion, he was completely confident that his strength could be restored to the ice-condensing realm in a few hours. Should he break through or not? Li Tianlan was in a daze all the way, but he was always thinking about this question in his mind. Before the 4 realms of martial arts, he would recultivate in the chi-controlling realm, the ice-condensing realm, the fire-flaming realm, and even the thunder-shocking realm. Because he had experienced the whole process before, he would not encounter any bottlenecks. What he needed most was the comprehension of martial arts, the perfection of the realm and the perfection of the sword intent, and to walk the path he had walked before carefully again to make up for some of his shortcomings. It wasn't difficult, but it wasn't easy either. Although he wouldn't encounter any bottlenecks in the process of recovering his strength, he would need to be more careful and cautious than before. After all, at his current age, he didn't have the opportunity or capital to start over again if he wanted to maintain his age and potential advantage. He had been in the thunder-shocking realm for a short time, so there was no need to consider it for the time being. The defect of the fire-flaming realm had been pointed out to him by Fireman, who was known as the strongest fire-flaming realm expert in the desert. He had a general idea about the defect of the ice-condensing realm, but he hadn't found any problem with the chi-controlling realm before. But it wasn't until he saw Tribulation that he realized that his previous chi-controlling realm was not the most perfect state. Tribulation's current state was extremely strange. He took almost the same path as Fireman. They both kept breaking through the limit in a single realm and planned to go straight to the invincible realm. At present, Tribulation went even further in the chi-controlling realm than Fireman did in the fire-flaming realm. When Tribulation forced his sword back, there was already a trace of the momentum of the invincible realm. Now Tribulation was not so much in the chi-controlling realm as in the half-step invincible realm. Li Tianlan didn't intend to take this thorny path, which was also possible to go straight to the invincible realm, but he really wanted to discuss with the person who had gone the furthest in the chi-controlling realm about the perfection and the limit of the chi-controlling realm. He just wanted to discuss the pure chi-controlling realm, not the martial arts beyond the chi-controlling realm. This should be of great help to Li Tianlan. "Take it slow, take it slow," Li Tianlan suddenly said. At first, his voice was very light, but in the end, his tone had become extremely firm. Now it could be said that he needed strength the most, but he also understood that haste makes waste. There was no bottleneck in recultivation, but some of the dangers were enough to affect his future foundation and ultimate achievements. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and narrowed his eyes. In any case, he couldn't rush it. "What?" Zhuang Huayang turned his head and looked at him, asking in astonishment. Nothing, I just figured it out. Some things can't be rushed. Li Tianlan smiled. There was a lot of heavy rain in front and behind them, but they were not affected by the wind and rain. This kind of pleasure seemed to trample on the laws of nature, which was what every warrior was pursuing. Zhuang Huayang's mouth twitched. He glanced at Li Tianlan and didn't speak. Some things can't be rushed? Thinking of Gu Changjiang and Zhong Xiaofeng who died grievously, he shook his head, and his eyes became a little worried. Go to my office. It's quiet and suitable for meditation and recovery. The old man walked on the narrow bridge against the wind and rain, and his tone was flat. Li Tianlan nodded subconsciously, and then glanced at Wang Yuetong beside him. Wang Yuetong held the little golden retriever she brought from Yonghua Villa tightly in her arms. She looked at Li Tianlan and said with a chuckle, "It's important to recover. Senior brother, call me when you're well, and we'll have dinner together. I still have 200 credits waiting for you to take." The narrow bridge was close to the end. A school bus just stopped on the side of the road. Wang Yuetong walked to the school bus with the dog in her arms, walking lightly. Zhuang Huayang looked at her exquisite back, sighed softly, and said, "I'm going to drag the Wang family of Beihai down again." "What do you mean?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly and asked subconsciously. "It's all your fault. Do you really think that Gu Changjiang's matter is over?" Zhuang Huayang glared at him and snorted coldly, "This is just the beginning." He looked at the rain falling from the sky and said slowly, "Gu Changjiang is one of Gu Xingyun's most trusted confidants. Kunlun City has developed very fast these years. At least in the special warfare system, they have basically completed their layout. You can't imagine how powerful this force is. Now that Gu Changjiang is dead, how can Gu Xingyun let it go? The news of Gu Changjiang's death will spread at night at the latest. At that time, both Dongqing Wudi and I will be called to Hidden Dragon Sea by Gu Xingyun for questioning. He is the real invincible giant in Zhongzhou State. If he wants to investigate something, no one can stop him. Considering the time of Gu Changjiang's death, Dongqing Wudi and I, who almost appeared on the battlefield at the same time, will even become Gu Xingyun's first suspects. At this time, if the Wang family of Beihai can be involved to share some of the pressure, Marshall and I will be better off." Li Tianlan was silent for a while and then said softly, "He can only be suspicious at most, right?" In the hospital, although they had a conflict with Gu Changjiang, in the final analysis, it was just a slap in the face. Besides, Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi were both lobbyists. Before there was no conclusive evidence, even if Gu Xingyun was the god of war of Zhongzhou State, he could not turn black into white. Just because of a slap in the face that had nothing to do with them, they would kill Gu Changjiang? Not to mention whether others believed it or not, even Gu Xingyun himself would not believe it. And Li Tianlan's strength would soon be suppressed to the qi-controlling realm. He was like an ant, so Gu Xingyun would not care about him. As for Qin Weibai, not to mention which airport she went to, at least she did not have the motive to kill Gu Changjiang. Even if she took the wrong medicine and wanted to kill Gu Changjiang, she would not choose this time, let alone choose to risk her life, so she also had no suspicion. Before taking action, Li Tianlan had thought about everything. Now, no matter how he thought about it, he did not think that Kunlun City could confirm that he was the murderer in a short time. Don't underestimate Kunlun City, and don't underestimate Gu Xingyun. Zhuang Huayang looked at Li Tianlan with a serious look. Now the other party is probably suspicious. But if this kind of thing is not investigated clearly, neither the higher-ups nor Gu Xingyun will give up. If they investigate carefully, maybe there will be a flaw in some detail, and then you will be exposed. Kunlun City has the ability to do this, and it won't even take too long. "What are you going to do?" Li Tianlan asked calmly. "Can this matter also involve the Wang family of Beihai?" As long as they want to do it, they can. As for the position left by Gu Changjiang, the academy and the Dongqing clan can join hands and let Yi Fengqing take it. Zhuang Huayang said thoughtfully, Yi Fengqing himself was born in the Yi family, the top wealthy family in Yuzhou. If he was not too wild, he would not come to the Sky Academy. Take this opportunity to push him up. Li Tianlan wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He thought carefully and said slowly, Wang Tianzong is not a fool. As soon as Gu Changjiang had an accident, you and the marshal wanted to push Yi Fengqing. Wouldn't that make Kunlun City more suspicious? Even the Wang family of Beihai will doubt your purpose. Our purpose is obvious. Zhuang Huayang chuckled and said, we didn't give Yi Fengqing this position for free. It's a deal. If he replaces Gu Changjiang, the position he left will naturally be left to tribulation. In this way, the academics, the Dongcheng clan, and Sai City will give people a sense of closer cooperation. Kunlun City has always been vigilant against Sai City. Once Sai City takes action, Gu Xingyun's attention will also be diverted. If Yi Fengqing takes this position, Gu Xingyun's eyes will also fall on him. The matter of Gu Changjiang will be diluted for the time being. As for the future, let's operate it slowly. He looked at Li Tianlan, who was thoughtful and couldn't help laughing. Not to mention Li Tianlan, sometimes even he himself could not understand the swords and sabers among the high-level officials in the general trend. Undercurrents were surging, and the situation was changing. If he carefully guided Kunlun City's attention, Gu Changjiang's case could not be hidden forever, but at least it could be hidden for a long time. Will the Wang family of Beihai accept the position of the director of Huading Special Operations Bureau? Li Tianlan said all of a sudden. Anyway, it's a feudal lord who enjoys the treatment of a governor. The Wang family of Beihai doesn't know the inside story. Why not accept it? Moreover, the Yi family put Yi Fengqing in the Sky Academy, and they might have the intention to find a chance to take down Huading Special Operations Bureau. The Yi family is one of the core components of the Southeast Group. Wang Tianzong still has to take care of the Yi family's face. Yi family. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and suddenly thought of Yi Dongxing, known as the god of army of Zhongzhou State, the middle-aged man who went to the border in person to take his grandfather back to Yuzhou. He raised his eyebrows slightly and asked directly, Yi Fengqing and Yi Dongxing. Yi Dongxing is the elder brother. They are brothers. Zhuang Huayang said casually. He patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and said, You, don't think too much. Now your main task is to improve your strength. Someone will find a way to cover for you some things outside. Li Tianlan nodded silently. Do you have doubts about the realm now? Especially the Qi-controlling realm? I've made an appointment with Tribulation at my house. You can have a good talk with him. Although Sai City hasn't announced it, you are now the young governor of Sai City. Tribulation won't hide anything from you. Zhuang Huayang continued to say with a smile. Li Tianlan was already dumbfounded. Sai City? Young governor? On the day when his hair turned white, after the death of the black-robed man, he did hear the words, young governor. But at that time, he completely turned a deaf ear to it and didn't think about it at all. Now that he heard the words again, Li Tianlan suddenly reacted completely. His heart was pounding, and he said subconsciously, You said I'm the young governor of Sai City? It was not until now that he realized how powerful Tribulation's words were when he said he was one of them. Of course. Zhuang Huayang said with a smile. Sidu Zhongyue was going to announce the news immediately, but now the situation is sensitive. I personally communicated with Her Highness Hidden God to keep the news secret for the time being. It would be better to announce it when the time is right. Li Tianlan's tone was strange and dry. Sai City, Mountabai. He had never even been to that place, but he inexplicably became their young governor. Li Tianlan only felt astonished and absurd in his heart. Tribulation chose you himself. Who else could it be but you? Zhuang Huayang said casually. Isn't Sidu Zhongyue in charge of Sai City? Li Tianlan frowned slightly. A few days ago, he was still worried about the position of Sai City and the danger that might be brought to him after the desperate chase was exposed. But now he had become the young governor of Sai City, which was a big change. From this point of view, Sai City's position was more than firm. It was simply die-hard loyalty. Both Situ Zhongyue and Tribulation have the final say. They are brother and sister. Tribulation's full name used to be Situ Wanjie, but no one calls him that now. Zhuang Huayang said softly, Before you appeared, Tribulation was the next governor of Sai City. Now he, the next governor, is willing to give up his position voluntarily. What else can others say? But why me? Li Tianlan's mind was in a mess, and he smiled bitterly. He felt as if a big pie had fallen from the sky and landed squarely on his head, making him dizzy. Because tribulation used to have a teacher. Zhuang Huayang said softly and shook his head. Almost everything he has now, including his current path, was given to him by that person. Back then, that person almost became his brother-in-law. Li Tianlan's heart trembled slightly. Chapter 100. Zhuang Huayang lost his wife when he was middle-aged. His son was the chief of staff of a main army group in the Northern Theater of Operations with the rank of Major General. His daughter-in-law also worked in the military system as a major in the General Logistics Department. She was out of town all year round. Therefore, Zhuang Huayang lived alone most of the time in the villa located in the center of the Sky Academy, except for his granddaughter Qin Ku, who also worked in the Sky Academy, who occasionally came to stay for a few days. Therefore, the old man concentrated his residence and office in the villa, which became the place where several staff members who served Zhuang Huayang worked. There were 2 secretaries, an assistant, a driver, a chef, 2 housekeepers with strict political review, and a gardener. Although there were not many people, at least there was some vitality in the big villa, so that Zhuang Huayang, who was already old, would not be too lonely. It was the first time that Li Tianlan came to Zhuang Huayang's villa. Looking at all the flowers and bamboo forests around the villa that had nothing to do with iron and blood, he couldn't help smiling and whispered, "Headmaster, you are in a good mood. I'm old and don't like fighting and killing. My children are not around. Every day, in addition to dealing with official business, I only have these flowers and fish to accompany me." Zhuang Huayang passed by the pool and pointed to it. Drizzle fell from the sky into the pool, splashing ripples and spreading all over the pool. A large number of fish surged in the wrinkled water, clear and blurry, with an extraordinary artistic conception. Li Tianlan glanced at the fish in the pond with great interest. The fish were brightly colored and swam lightly. Some of the bigger ones were indeed worthy of the 4 words, divine and fat. He touched his chin and said casually, "Headmaster, can this thing be eaten? Can I add a dish for you tonight? My fish roast is excellent. Even if it can be eaten, you can't catch it. If your teacher Qin knows, she will fight with you. These are all her treasures. If I forget to feed them, she will ignore me for a few days." Zhuang Huayang smiled grumpily. Passing by the pool, he entered the villa first. "Teacher Qin?" Li Tianlan was stunned. Thinking of the cold face of Qin Ku, the deputy director of the teaching office, he shook his head slightly. He didn't expect that icy beauty to have such a soft heart. The 2 of them entered the villa one after another and went straight to the 3rd floor. Zhuang Huayang entered a spacious but extremely simple office. Looking at the time, he calmly said, "There's a lounge here, where I usually meditate. I guarantee that no one will disturb me. You can recuperate there, and you can come over if you need to make a breakthrough in the future." Li Tianlan said and opened the box in his hand. In the box, the whole set of immortality potion was still in an activated state. The purple liquid was slightly tumbling in the vessel. It would take about 2 hours to take it. Li Tianlan closed the box and waited quietly. To some extent, his path to the invincible realm was contained in the box in front of him. "Do you want to meditate first to adjust your state?" Zhuang Huayang asked. Li Tianlan shook his head and said no. Then he suddenly asked, "Have you made an appointment with tribulation?" Zhuang Huayang nodded, but before he could speak, there was a knock on the door. The old headmaster was stunned for a moment, but he said, "Come in." The door was pushed open from the outside. Qin Ku, the deputy director of the teaching office of the Sky Academy, walked into the office, followed by a shadow. Drifting, silent, and forbearing. This was the 2nd time that Li Tianlan had seen tribulation, the #1 assassin in Zhongzhou State and even in the Dark World. But even though he knew his identity and strength, Li Tianlan couldn't help but look at Qin Ku at first sight. It was not because Qin Ku was too beautiful. In terms of appearance, the mature and indifferent director Qin was naturally the best choice. But after Li Tianlan had Qin Weibai, it was hard for her pure appearance to amaze him. He looked at her at first sight because the existence of tribulation was too easy to be ignored. He was the top assassin and killer, the source of the most danger. Everyone could feel the danger and sharpness under his silent surface, but they just couldn't notice him. This feeling was absurd and weird. The instinctive danger stimulated Li Tianlan's skin, and for a moment even made his hair stand on end. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, stood up, and called Miss Qin. He looked at tribulation and opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. He was Situ Cangyue's younger brother, his father's student, and Situ Cangyue was his father's confidant. The seniority of these three people was a little confused. Now looking at tribulation, Li Tianlan only felt that it was not appropriate to call him anything. Uncle? Or brother? The corner of his mouth twitched, and finally he said in a dry voice, "Hello, teacher." Teacher Li said that he accepted a disciple on behalf of his teacher, and also on behalf of his father. So he always asked me to call him senior brother. I was not qualified to call teacher Li senior brother in those days, but now it should not be difficult for you to call me martial uncle, right? Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. The master Li that tribulation mentioned was naturally his father. If his father had accepted a disciple at that time, then according to seniority, tribulation could be said to be a student of his grandfather, Li Honghe. In this way, seniority was reasonable. He nodded, bowed slightly to tribulation, and said in a respectful tone, "Martial uncle. You're good." Tribulation still wore a mask, and the silver mask covered the expression of his whole face. But his silent eyes flashed with inexplicable brilliance. He took a deep look at Li Tianlan and continued, "Teacher Li can rest in peace." "Rest in peace?" Li Tianlan straightened up slightly, shook his head, and said calmly, "How can I rest in peace without avenging my great hatred and grievances?" Even though Qin Ku, who had known Li Tianlan's identity from her grandfather, had enough psychological preparation, she could not help but feel a little shocked when she heard Li Tianlan's calm but sharp words. How could he rest in peace without avenging his great hatred and grievances? This seemed to be a simple sentence, but whether it succeeded or failed in the future, the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State was destined to experience a storm of blood. When you grow up, take revenge for your hatred and redress for your grievances. Tribulation's voice was calm and hoarse. He bowed slightly to Li Tianlan and expressed his attitude in the clearest way for the first time. Sai City will become the sharpest weapon in the hands of young governor. If you ask for anything, it will be granted. This was the second time Li Tianlan had heard such words. The first time was in the Dongqing clan. His heart beat fiercely, and his blood surged to his head. Even his face was a little red. Perhaps his father had never thought that in the many years after his death, the student he had taught would grow into the sharpest and most mysterious assassin in the dark world. Nor did he think that his confidant would become the governor of Sai City, who was famous in the dark world. And all of this would become his help in the future. "Thank you," Li Tianlan said softly. His calm tone was firm enough to penetrate gold and stone. This day will not be too far away. Zhuang Huayang and Qin Ku, who had witnessed all this, had complicated looks in their eyes. In the entire office, perhaps only he knew what he had witnessed at this moment. In the office of the headmaster of the Sky Academy, the two men bowed to each other this time, representing the first transfer of power in Sai City. It also proved that Sai City, after standing aloof from the world for many years, entered the Jianghu full of ups and downs, swords, and intrigues in Zhongzhou State for the first time. The general trend was rumbling forward. Zhuang Huayang, who had witnessed all this with his own eyes, felt that he was as small as an ant standing in front of the general trend. Qin Ku, another bystander, obviously did not feel this way. The moment tribulation slightly bent down, the deputy director of the teaching office of the Sky Academy subconsciously wanted to step forward to support him. But after being glared at by Zhuang Huayang, she reluctantly stood where she was. Although she did not move, her eyes were full of anger again when she looked at Li Tianlan. He entered the thunder-shocking realm at the age of 31. Qin Ku could be said to be a famous genius in the entire special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Since she came into contact with martial arts, she most admired and appreciated Situ Tsangyue, a female invincible realm expert. But what she most admired was not the Sword Emperor or the God of War of Zhongzhou State. It was tribulation. This was not a surprising thing. In the whole dark world, countless assassins and killers had the same idea as Qin Ku. The Sword Emperor was indeed invincible. The God of War was indeed strong. But for countless killers and assassins, tribulation was the real faith and the pioneer. He entered the thunder-shocking realm at the age of 26 and made great progress since then. He tried to enter the invincible realm from the chi-controlling realm and created the Buddhist incantation of 9 words, which was on par with the Great Soaring Temple. For hundreds of years, tribulation had always been recognized as the most talented and courageous assassin. In the Buddhist incantation of 9 words that only belonged to him, there were 2 unique skills that represented 2 completely different paths of the invincible realm. You could not recognize such a person and regard him as a madman, but you had to admire him. Once such a person entered the invincible realm, even without a murderous weapon, he was enough to rank at the top of the divine list and suppress his sister Situ Tsangyue. If his road was not too bumpy, perhaps countless people in the dark world would have begun to imitate his martial arts. As one of tribulation's admirers, Qin Ku did not want to see her idol bend down and bow his head for any reason. "You're welcome, young governor." Tribulation straightened up and said calmly, "You don't have to rush to break through. You are now in the chi-controlling realm. When you recover from your injury, I am willing to share with you what I have learned in my life without reservation. I hope you can break through the chi-controlling realm in the most perfect state. Your road is not the road of the invincible realm, but the road of the chosen one." Li Tianlan grabbed the box containing the Immortality Potion series and looked at Zhuang Huayang without saying a word. Zhuang Huayang pointed to the direction of the lounge without saying a word. Li Tianlan completely gave up the plan to break through the chi-controlling realm. Without hesitation, he went straight to the lounge. The decoration of the lounge was more simple. In addition to a single bed, there was only a blanket for meditation. Li Tianlan sat on the blanket and sniffed the calming fragrance in the air, which could help him enter the meditative state more quickly. He became more and more empty. In the office, Tribulation stood in front of the window and looked at the rain outside. Once again, he became an inconspicuous shadow. Time passed slowly in silence. The 3 people in the office did not say a word, and each had his own thoughts. Cool breeze and drifting cloud will go out of the city soon. After a long silence, Tribulation suddenly said, "One goes to Yuzhou, and the other comes to Huading." Cool breeze and drifting cloud. The 2 top assassins, known as the Double Walls of Sai City, went down the mountain not to carry out a task, but to the 2 most important cities in Zhongzhou State. What did this mean? Zhuang Huayang subconsciously tightened his body. He knew very well that Tribulation said this to let the academics give a certain degree of support to Sai City. Such support was also what the academics was happy to give. But what did this mean? "Are you ready?" Zhuang Huayang said in a deep voice. If Sai City went out of the northeast and returned to Jianghu after many years, their conflicts with Kunlun City, the Wang family of Beihai, and even some wealthy families of the Special Warfare Group would immediately become extremely acute. Such a move was too rash. "I know you want to help Tianlan pave the way, but isn't it too hasty now?" Zhuang Huayang looked at Tribulation, who continued to be silent, and asked again. "Now is the right time." Tribulation's voice was calm and indifferent. Zhuang Huayang was silent. Sai City was completely different from the academics. Sai City and Li Tianlan had the same position, so they acted so resolutely. But the academics wooed Li Tianlan for politics and interests. At this stage, Li Tianlan showed his potential, and the academics was willing to do something for his future, such as protecting his safety and giving him time to grow up. But some things were too sensitive, such as Li Tianlan's identity and the case of treason. The academics were willing to protect Li Tianlan, which was completely different from the academics going to war with Kunlun City for Li Tianlan. Even if Li Tianlan entered the invincible realm in the future, The academics could not completely turn against Kunlun City for him, or even suppress them, unless Kunlun City was really at the end of its rope. To put it simply, no matter how much support the academics gave to Li Tianlan, it was limited. No matter what would happen in the future, the academics would have a way out. But Sai City was completely different. During the period of Li Tianlan's growth, Sai City directly began to pave the way for him, making it clear that they would advance and retreat together with Li Tianlan. Unless Li Tianlan's identity and his relationship with Sai City were never exposed, if Li Tianlan failed in the future, the whole Sai City would disappear because of Li Tianlan's failure. Zhuang Huayang asked whether Li Tianlan was ready, but in fact he asked whether Sai City had really thought about it. And Tribulation's answer had explained everything. The academics did not have such boldness, because they did not have such a position at all. They did not draw Li Tianlan to their side to start a war with Kunlun City. From the beginning, they did it for interests, and it would be the same in the future. This matter involves too much. If we fail in the future, then we'll fail. Before Zhuang Huayang finished his words, Tribulation had directly interrupted him, and his tone became calmer and more determined. He suddenly turned his head, looked at Qin Ku and asked, "Director Qin, would you like to join Sai City?" Zhuang Huayang's face changed dramatically. Before he could speak, Qin Ku was already ecstatic and said without hesitation, "I'd like to follow Her Highness Hidden God." Not follow Her Highness Hidden God. Tribulation corrected Qin Ku seriously, "It's follow young governor." Qin Ku hesitated for a moment and nodded. Her eyes turned to the direction of the lounge, and she remained silent. The person she would follow in the future, the person who would follow Tribulation together, was now inside, recovering from his injuries. The descendant of the Li family? Thinking of his terrifying potential, Qin Ku's eyes were in a trance. If Li Tianlan could graduate with the first place in 2 academies and set up his own force, when his identity was exposed and the whole Sai City was under Li Tianlan's command, how big a storm would it set off in the whole Zhongzhou state? Behind that storm, was it the official rise of the heavenly sun, or the complete fall of the god of war? Qin Ku pressed her red lips tightly. Vaguely, the storm was getting closer and closer. At the same time, in the lounge, Li Tianlan, who was meditating, opened his eyes and opened the box in front of him. Inside the box, the whole set of immortal life had been fully activated. The purple liquid of the second generation of immortal life fluctuated slightly, flashing with endless vitality, magnificent and gorgeous. Li Tianlan looked calm. He subconsciously touched his white hair, and the other hand held the vessel containing the second generation of immortal life. This was the thing that could heal his injuries. This was the thing that could even make his potential better. Li Tianlan's eyes were deep and peaceful. Between reality and illusion, there seemed to be a road reflected in front of him. On that road, there were blood and bones, glory and forbearance, laughter and sad songs, heavy rain and heavy snow. It was full of thorns, but it was extremely flat. It had everything, but there was no way out. It could only go forward and go up. The wide road stretched out in front of him, as if it reached the end of the sky. Li Tianlan unscrewed the vessel in his hand and poured the purple liquid directly into his mouth. Chapter 101. The thunder rolled over the gloomy sky, and the pale lightning tore the sky. The wind suddenly blew in hooting, and the bean-sized raindrops rumbled down. The whole Sky Academy became more and more silent under the raging wind and rain, and only the sound of wind and rain could be heard. Tribulation stood silently in front of the window, watching the wind blowing through the bamboo forest outside the window and the heavy rain ravaging the sea of flowers. Some petals and bamboo leaves were knocked down by the raindrops and fluttered in the wind. All the scenes were clearly reflected in his pupils, like a seemingly regular but actually broken and messy picture. Tribulation looked out of the window quietly, motionless. There was no light in the office, and the gloomy sky was gradually dimming. In the increasingly gloomy office, Tribulation's figure seemed to have completely disappeared with the darkness. Only a dangerous aura was floating in the office, as if it didn't exist, but it seemed to be everywhere. "Have a cup of tea?" Zhuang Huayang finally broke the silence behind the office and took the initiative to greet him. He didn't like such an atmosphere, but that was Tribulation's character. It was even said that he and his biological sister, Sitangyue, didn't talk for a month, and they were silent most of the time. Zhuang Huayang didn't know about this, but in the past few days in the Sky Academy, Tribulation was basically deaf and dumb most of the time. He didn't listen, see, or speak, except when facing Li Tianlan. It seemed that the rumors were not groundless. "Just drink some water." Tribulation's hoarse and low voice sounded, because the dangerous aura in the office slightly fluctuated. The figure in front of the window really turned into a shadow, and Tribulation's body had appeared silently beside the water dispenser. Zhuang Huayang moved his body subconsciously, and for a moment, he really regretted letting Qin Ke leave. As one of the top 10 contemporary experts in Zhongzhou State, he was really under a lot of pressure to face Tribulation, the most perfect assassin in hundreds of years, alone. He knew that Tribulation wouldn't attack him, but the sense of danger always made him tense up almost instinctively. In just a few hours, Zhuang Huayang felt a little powerless, and both his spirit and body were in a state of extreme fatigue. The sky became dim again. The whole office was dark. Tribulation seemed to feel Zhuang Huayang's unnaturalness, and all the dangerous aura in the office was suddenly restrained by him. Zhuang Huayang's body tightened. The dangerous aura in the office had indeed disappeared, but in his feeling, Tribulation seemed to have completely disappeared. In such a state, Tribulation seemed to have completely disappeared. Zhuang Huayang could even be sure that if the sharpest and most explosive assassin in Zhongzhou State attacked him, he would not even have a chance to fight back. "Do you want Tianlan to be like you?" Zhuang Huayang moved his body and suddenly said thoughtfully. He had to make some sounds to relieve his pressure. Otherwise, it would be too tiring to maintain a fully defensive posture. That will depend on his own choice. I will teach him everything I have learned in my life, but he does not need to deliberately copy my path. When Zhuang Huayang was unprepared, Tribulation's voice suddenly sounded opposite him. Zhuang Huayang seemed to have accepted Tribulation's unpredictability. He narrowed his eyes slightly and said softly, "All my life's learning? Including your shadow and your 9 secret words?" The shadow of Tribulation and the Buddhist incantation of 9 words of Tribulation. This could completely include Tribulation's lifelong unique skills, and it was also something that all killers dreamed of but could not get. Tribulation was the only person with dual wind veins in the dark world today. It might not be as precious as wind and thunder veins, but it was rarer. In terms of speed, he was born with an unparalleled advantage. But with such an advantage, Tribulation created 4 shadows in an extremely abnormal way, which made him really elusive in the battle, like a shadow following the body. The 4 shadows could synchronously imitate all his movements, and Tribulation could switch positions with the shadows at will in the battle. In countless battles, Tribulation's dazzling fighting style was like a nightmare. Even many people had never touched a corner of Tribulation's clothes before they died. Such a fighting style was the most terrifying thing about him. Tribulation's shadow was a secret, and there were many speculations in the dark world. Some people said that it was the realm that could only be reached when the chi-controlling realm reached the extreme, and others said that it was the unique horror of dual wind veins. There were all kinds of speculations, but Tribulation and his shadow were always unique in the dark world, which created the King of Shadow, who was almost invincible under the invincible realm. As for Tribulation's Buddhist incantation of 9 words, it showed even more boldness. The 9 unique skills, when used in any situation, had its unique power and effect. At present, Tribulation's Buddhist incantation of 9 words could not be compared with the Great Soaring Temple's Buddhist incantation of 9 words. But if he really entered the invincible realm from the chi-controlling realm, the Buddhist incantation of 9 words would be equivalent to the advanced level. At that time, this thing, which was comparable to the Killer's Bible, might not be much worse than the Great Soaring Temple's Buddhist incantation of 9 words in terms of influence and lethality. Li Tianlan, who could enter the thundershocking realm before the age of 18, had no doubt about his potential or talent. If tribulation gave Li Tianlan all his life's work, what would be the result of an attack-type character with the skills of a top-notch assassin? As long as he thought about it, Zhuang Huayang's scalp went numb. If there was really such an opponent, Zhuang Huayang didn't want to provoke him even if he didn't reach the thunder-shocking realm. Of course, apart from these two things, do I have anything else to offer? I'm not as good as the ancestor who created the map of God of War in Zhuanyuantai or the heavenly son who established the Wang family of Beihai. I have no intention of changing Tianlan's path. I just hope that what I give him can make him more flexible on the road of indomitable progress. Tribulation's tone was still hoarse and low, but if you listened carefully, you could always hear a trace of lightness in it. When it came to the topic of Li Tianlan, he really talked much more than usual. Zhuang Huayang still wanted to say something, but the sound of the door opening suddenly sounded. Outside the window, the heavy rain was roaring and disturbing the whole world, but the sound of the door opening was extremely clear in their ears. Tribulation looked back at once and casually flicked his fingers. The air in front of him suddenly twisted and turned into a cyclone, knocking on the light switch in the office. The soft light was a little dazzling when it lit up. Tribulation and Zhuang Huayang narrowed their eyes at the same time. In the lounge, Li Tianlan walked out with a smile on his face. His originally pale face had completely turned ruddy, and his extremely worrying dry white hair had now all turned soft and shiny silver white. The biggest change in Li Tianlan was his height. He was originally nearly 1.75 meters tall, which was actually not short among the people of Zhongzhou State. But compared with Qin Weibai, he was much weaker. Qin Weibai, who was 1.76 meters tall barefoot, put on high heels, and her slender and exquisite figure was truly peerlessly enchanting. Li Tianlan had nothing to feel inferior about in terms of height, but he was most unhappy that he needed Qin Weibai's deliberate cooperation to play a stimulating position in bed. Now, in just a few hours, under the stimulation of an absolutely powerful life force, his height had grown by nearly 5 centimeters. His originally ordinary figure had a slender and handsome look. If his appearance was a little more handsome, coupled with his non-mainstream but not out-of-place silver white hair, he would definitely be a standard handsome man. Tianlan, how do you feel? Zhuang Huayang took the initiative to ask in a concerned tone. I feel very good. Countless excitement in Li Tianlan's heart was barely suppressed, but the smile on his face was getting wider and wider. Perfect, unprecedentedly good. He was telling the truth. Now he was indeed in an unprecedentedly good state. The strong vitality provided by the immortality potion completely suppressed his inflated strength to the chi-controlling realm and turned the strength into potential. His original strength was at the peak of the chi-controlling realm, but now it did not advance but retreated to the stabilization period of the chi-controlling realm. This did not seem to be good news, but his foundation and potential had become more solid. Although his realm was lower, his combat capability did not retreat but advanced, which was already surprising enough. But the more surprising thing was yet to come. As the only person in hundreds of years who had taken the whole set of immortality potion, his overdrawn potential and vitality had not only been completely made up, but also more vigorous than before. Perhaps because of the environment in which he grew up, he could be regarded as seriously malnourished when he was a child, and many parts of his body were very fragile. The effect of the whole set of immortality potion had completely eliminated some hidden dangers in his body. His height was only an external change, and the internal transformation was actually more earth-shaking. Now every bone and muscle in his body, as well as essence, chi and spirit, was in an unprecedented perfect state. This also meant that the door of the invincible realm had been completely opened to him, and there was no more change. At this moment, Li Tianlan's heart could be said to be full of lofty sentiments, and there was already a hint of a superior's demeanor when he looked around. Your hair! Zhuang Huayang hesitated a little. The silver white hair was really beautiful and soft, but it was too dazzling. Wait for 2 months, when the hair grows out, it will be black, and then I will cut the silver hair. Li Tianlan casually grabbed his hair and smiled. He did not like such a non-mainstream color. Zhuang Huayang was finally completely relieved and said with a smile, Congratulations. Li Tianlan smiled, but his eyes were a little dazed. He took the water handed to him by Tribulation, took a sip and whispered, "I really should thank her." The master of Samsara Palace, who had never met him but dared to go straight to Mount Dibbing, might have done what she did for Qin Weibai, but this kindness, which was like rebirth, fell directly on him. Li Tianlan could not forget, and did not dare to forget. Li Tianlan subconsciously took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. The phone was turned off, which was not unexpected at all. He shook his head and sighed softly. "You've grown taller," Tribulation whispered. His voice was still hoarse and low, but there was a hint of smile in his eyes when he looked at Li Tianlan. "Well, it's a surprise." Li Tianlan moved his body. He was now in the stabilization phase of the Qi-controlling realm, but what he felt was obviously more terrifying than when he was at the peak of the Qi-controlling realm. He narrowed his eyes slightly. He wanted to say something but hesitated, but he could not wait in his heart. "Your current state is very suitable for breaking the limit of the Qi-controlling realm." Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan, and there was appreciation in his tone. Li Tianlan smiled and said, "Martial uncle, I don't intend to follow your path. I have my own path." Whether it was from the Qi-controlling realm to the invincible realm directly or step by step, there was no difference between them. The most suitable path was the strongest. "I don't mean to interfere with your path, but I have some things that can make you more flexible," Tribulation whispered. He glanced at Zhuang Huayang and said calmly, "Anything else?" This was really not polite at all. But for Zhuang Huayang, this was the most normal posture for him to get along with Tribulation. So he shook his head and simply said, "Please go ahead." Tribulation nodded and took Li Tianlan directly out of the office. Li Tianlan hesitated and finally couldn't help but ask, "Martial uncle, in your opinion, what's the limit of the Qi-controlling realm?" Tribulation's slightly short and thin figure was wrapped in black clothes, almost integrated with the dark environment of the villa. "Why, are you in a hurry to break through?" Li Tianlan touched his nose. Except for his grandfather, it was the first time for him to get along with someone related to his father. His heart was indescribably relaxed. He nodded slightly and said calmly, "I need to grow up. The most perfect growth is the most meaningful. I still say that your path is not the path of the invincible realm, but the path of the chosen one. You asked me where the limit of the Qi-controlling realm is. Let me ask you first. With your current strength, if you go all out, what realm can you kill?" Tribulation asked. Li Tianlan thought about it seriously. This time he took a whole set of immortality potions and got great benefits. Not only did it make up for his vitality and potential, but because of the previous malnutrition, his potential was further expanded. Now his realm had regressed a little, but his combat capability had improved a lot. He narrowed his eyes and whispered, "If I go all out, I can kill an expert in the breaking phase of the fire-flaming realm. I can be undefeated when I meet an expert in the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. I can survive when I meet an expert in the peak of the fire-flaming realm." "Is it the ordinary fire-flaming realm?" Tribulation said in a straightforward tone. Li Tianlan nodded with a wry smile. The so-called ordinary fire-flaming realm, in other words, was a person with no potential. But most of the standards of strength were divided according to such people. Not to mention Wang Xingxiao from the Wang family of Beihai and Gu Hanshan from Kunlun City, people like Ning Qianqing, Li Beidian and Wang Yuetong were all freaks in the eyes of most people. They were not representative. Ning Qianqing should have entered the fire-flaming realm. But with Li Tianlan's Qi-controlling realm, he could only fight for an undefeated result at most, let alone kill such a genius. This level is obviously not the limit of the Qi-controlling realm. Tribulation shook his head. "If you are willing to listen to me, I suggest you stay in the Qi-controlling realm for a while. The specific time depends on your progress. What I'm going to teach you can be used in the fire-flaming realm and the thunder-shocking realm, and the power is not bad. But it's better to lay a good foundation in the Qi-controlling realm, so that you can have a more obvious advantage in other realms." He paused and continued, "Of course, not improving the realm doesn't mean not improving the combat strength. Watch carefully." He stepped out of the villa. Outside the door, the heavy rain fell wildly. In an instant, Li Tianlan could only vaguely feel that all the raindrops stopped for a moment the moment they fell on Tribulation's head. The fluctuation of the air seemed to be non-existent, but all the raindrops that were about to fall on Tribulation's head were pushed away in an instant. Even the water under Tribulation's feet was pushed forward like a wave. Tribulation stood where he was. The heavy rain was all over the sky, but the wind and rain did not invade him. There seemed to be an invisible wall surrounding him. All the raindrops that were about to fall on him were pushed away in all directions by the wall condensed by the air around him. This scene almost subverted Li Tianlan's cognition. In his cognition, the qi-controlling realm was the realm that could most easily improve people's flexibility, so the ultimate standard should be to control the qi into the wind. The wind moved with the person, and the person walked with the wind. It was like walking on the waves, between real and fake, unpredictable. But the scene in front of him made him see a further way. Controlling the qi into the wall, is this the limit of the qi-controlling realm? Li Tianlan stepped out of the door. Around him, the air was surging violently. The momentum was much stronger than that of Tribulation, but the effect was far worse. A lot of raindrops were blown away by him, but a lot of them also fell on him. The limit of each realm does not lie in the form of expression. Tribulation said slowly in the rain, from my personal standpoint, the limit of each realm should be the pseudo-invincible realm. Chapter 102. Before 12 o'clock in the next chapter. Pseudo-invincible realm. It was the first time that Li Tianlan had heard of this idea since he was a child. The 5 realms of qi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming, thunder shocking, and the mysterious invincible realm had never been fake. In the same realm, there might be a difference in combat capability, but there was absolutely no difference in realms. In this case, how could there be a pseudo-realm? Moreover, it was the pseudo-invincible realm. How terrifying was the pseudo-realm that could be related to the invincible realm? Li Tianlan had so many questions in his heart that he didn't know how to speak for a while. Tribulation in front of him formed a wall of qi controlling. As he passed, all the heavy rain was pushed aside, and the water under his feet receded as he moved forward, layer upon layer. The two were in the heavy rain. Li Tianlan was already wet all over, but Tribulation's body was not wet at all. It was refreshing, as if he was strolling in the courtyard under the sun, free and easy. Martial uncle, what is the pseudo-invincible realm? The two walked aimlessly along the road of the Sky Academy. On both sides of the road were neatly trimmed grass and woods, which were lush in spring. The air was clear, and the sound of rain hitting the woods was clear to the ears. The whole world seemed to be a harmonious scene. What is the invincible realm? Tribulation asked in a low and hoarse voice. Within a radius of 100 meters, it forms its own void and is invincible in the world. Li Tianlan hesitated and gave an answer calmly. This answer was not the Li family's answer, but it was the answer that many people agreed with. The fire-flaming realm concentrated all the strength of the whole body in an instant, evaporating the water in the air and making the flames in the air endless. The thunder-shocking realm experts were one level higher. The experts at this level had completely exceeded the imagination of ordinary people in terms of strength, speed, and explosive power. In an instant, they could condense lightning in the air at will. Their moves were accompanied by the sound of thunder and lightning, like wild thunder. In the dark world, if a fire-flaming realm expert was a real expert, then a thunder-shocking realm expert was undoubtedly a figure standing at the peak. This realm was the highest point of the 4 realms of martial arts. As for those who went beyond the 4 realms of martial arts and went straight to the invincible realm, they were almost no different from gods in the dark world. There were very few descriptions of entering the invincible realm from the thunder-shocking realm in the dark world, but it was not rare to see the records of invincible realm experts taking action. Once most of the supreme invincible realm experts took action, the extreme explosive force could almost instantly repel the air around them to 100 meters away. With the invincible realm experts as the center, There was no air within 100 meters, so naturally, there was no water, fire, or lightning. That was the real invincible. Within 100 meters, whether it was the thunder-shocking realm or the chi-controlling realm, they were all non-entities. This was the path that most of the superiors of the invincible realm were taking. Within a radius of 100 meters, they could form their own void. This was also the invincible realm with the highest degree of recognition. Within a radius of 100 meters, a void is formed. To put it bluntly, it is equivalent to a domain that only belongs to the invincible realm. At present, most of the superiors of the invincible realm are taking such a path. On such a path, ordinary people under the invincible realm can't even stand in this domain, let alone fight back. They can only become non-entities waiting to be slaughtered. The invincible realm is the enemy of the invincible realm. If the domains cancel each other out, life and death will be determined by one's own combat capability. Tunlun, what do you think of this path? Tribulation continued to ask. This is my path, but not all. Li Tianlan said with a dignified look. He practiced the invincible manual in the map of God of War, and he had no lack of famous teachers since he was a child. Not to mention his grandfather Li Honghe, who used to be the God of War in Zhongzhou State, there were many experts of the fire-flaming realm and the thunder-shocking realm among the veterans without military ranks in the border camp. He was not timid when it came to martial arts with Tribulation, the most talented and courageous assassin in hundreds of years, but he did not dare to be careless. There was a difference of one word between a famous teacher and a good teacher, but the actual meaning was very different. Will Tribulation be my good teacher? Li Tianlan thought silently, a little lost in thought. So you are taking the path of the Chosen One. The path of the Chosen One. Li Tianlan suddenly looked up. It was the third time he heard this sentence today. The first 2 times he heard it, he just thought it was Tribulation's expectation for him. But in this situation, the path of the Chosen One represented too many other meanings. Martial uncle? Li Tianlan looked at Tribulation's back, and his eyes were completely focused. Martial uncle knows my path? The map of God of War, the invincible manual. Why don't I know it? Tribulation's tone was hoarse and low, but it was calm. But in Li Tianlan's ears, this sentence was like thunder. Yu Donglai knew that he practiced the invincible manual, Zhuang Huayang could also guess it, and the Dongqing clan might also know it. But how did Tribulation, who had no contact with him before, know it? Li Tianlan had vaguely guessed a possibility in his heart. His breathing was slightly rapid, and his eyes became fiery. About 5 years ago. As expected, Tribulation was silent for a while and slowly said, I met Senior Li, only him and me. My shadow and the Buddhist incantation of 9 words, and Senior Li helped me a lot. The most famous body movement in Sai City is the desperate chase. This body movement, to be exact, comes from the night walking skill of Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun. My shadow, you can think of it as the other extreme of the desperate chase. Tribulation said indifferently, the shadow itself is not terrible, but the shadow can imitate my movements, which is the most terrible thing. Tanlan, I have read part of the Invincible Manual, so I perfected the Buddhist incantation of 9 words and my martial arts. Our paths, to some extent, are similar. So although I studied under Teacher Li, Senior Li also helped me a lot, so it is reasonable for you to call me Martial Uncle. Li Tianlan did not speak for a long time. He subconsciously took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath and tried to calm his inner emotions. Tribulation's words contained too much information, and he had to digest it well. 5 years ago, his grandfather met Tribulation and showed him part of the Invincible Manual, helping him perfect the Buddhist incantation of 9 words and the shadow. At that time, he was 14 years old and had just entered the ice-condensing realm. In other words, there were some things that his grandfather had begun to operate secretly 5 years ago. Obviously, his grandfather, who had always been a little disheartened in the camp and watched the changes in Zhongzhou State, was not just idle on the surface. What else did he do in the dark? These trump cards, perhaps only when he grew to a certain extent would he be able to reveal them bit by bit. There are 2 ways to enter the invincible realm. The first way is to spread one's body into a domain and become an invincible void. Let's not talk about the dark world, let's talk about Zhongzhou State. Kunlun City has the world-shaking unique skill 10 skills of true martial arts. Their 10th skill is one of the strongest domains in the invincible realm. My sister, Sitsangyue, and even your grandfather, Senior Li, are all taking this path. The other way is to accumulate strength and premeditation. When you make a move, you just want to make the sky fall and the earth crack. At the end of this road, even if you are in the domain, you can also make ghosts and gods retreat with one sword strike. The Wang family of Beihai and the Peak Manual in the map of God of War are both such invincible roads. The two roads are equally strong, but the second road has more potential for growth. The former is the fulfillment of martial arts, while the latter is the fulfillment of sword intent. The Balance Manual in the map of God of War seeks martial arts, while the Peak Manual seeks sword intent. Tianlan, what does the Invincible Manual seek? Tribulation had always been talkative in front of Li Tianlan, so Li Tianlan did not feel anything strange. Listening to these words, which were regarded as pearls of wisdom, he was silent for a while before he calmly said, "The Invincible Manual attaches equal importance to martial arts and sword intent. According to Martial Uncle, it is the combination of the two roads. This is the road of the heavenly sun." Tribulation's tone became calmer and calmer. Although I only broke the limit of the chi-controlling realm, in my opinion, the 4 realms of martial arts, after each realm reaches the real fulfillment, will all be in the state of the pseudo-invincible realm. The pseudo-invincible realm refers to the same realm. Without unique skills, one can imitate a little of the means of the invincible realm only by fighting strength, and then one can really be invincible in the same realm. His strong state suddenly fell. In Li Tianlan's thoughtful eyes, his aura reached the chi-controlling realm in the blink of an eye. It was not the state after breaking the limit, but the pure, real chi-controlling realm. Tribulation turned around calmly. His eyes were focused and sharp, and a simple syllable shattered the surrounding rain in an instant. Stuff. The air and the rain twisted and spread in an instant. Li Tianlan, who was unprepared, only felt that he was pulled hard. He lost his balance and almost fell to the ground for a while. Tribulation turned around again and said blandly, "This is the pseudo-invincible realm of the chi-controlling realm. This is not the domain of the invincible realm, but it already has a similar function. At the moment when you lost your balance, if it was a life-and-death fight, I could kill you several times. At the critical moment of life and death, a moment may be a lifetime." In the heavy rain, Li Tianlan's expression kept changing. At that moment, if he had been on guard, he might not have fallen into a situation of certain death. But if it had been a battle, it would not have been difficult to put him at a complete disadvantage. The pseudo-invincible realm of the chi-controlling realm? He narrowed his eyes and said, "Martial Uncle, did you say that the completion of the 4 realms is the pseudo-invincible realm? I just have the most say in the chi-controlling realm. But if I guess right, the pseudo-invincible realm formed by the chi-controlling realm and the fire-flaming realm should be the embryonic form of the domain, and the completion of the ice-condensing realm and the thunder-shocking realm should be the embryonic form of the intent." Tribulation took out a file bag from his black clothes and handed it to Li Tianlan. He said calmly, "This is the essence of my body movement and the Buddhist incantation of 9 words. Take it and read it. Don't spread it. At your age, you don't need to rush to break through. When you reach the completion of the 4 realms and enter the invincible realm, you will be the real chosen one." 800 meters ahead, a shadow was slowly taking shape. Tribulation's voice was still in place, but his body had already exchanged places with the shadow and went away in an instant. These 3 years are enough for you to polish in the chi-controlling realm. You can also study what I teach you. 3 years later, when you graduate from the Sky Academy, if your chi-controlling realm can be completed and flawless, no one under the thunder-shocking realm will be your opponent. Li Tianlan stood in silence, holding the file bag tightly in his hand with a calm expression. Tribulation's attitude toward him was enough to show that the strongest assassin in Zhongzhou State had recognized his potential and talent. But in a sense, tribulation still underestimated him after all. He was infinitely perfect, in the true sense, without any shortcomings. Countless people in the Sky Academy knew that Li Tianlan had the wind and thunder veins, but no one knew that in addition to the wind and thunder veins, he also had the exquisite bone, which was more suitable for hiding and learning. As for the heavenly king heart besides these two constitutions, he entered the desert at the age of 17 and left the desert at the age of 18. He had already obtained the so-called heavenly king heart. Although the heavenly king heart was acquired, it was not necessarily worse than the inborn one. He had the wind and thunder veins, the exquisite bone, and the heavenly king heart. He practiced the map of God of War. In the dark world for hundreds of years, he was the only one who had such conditions. Breaking through the chi-controlling realm in 3 years? Li Tianlan smiled, looked at the file bag in his hand, and shook his head. Slow, too slow. The mobile phone vibrated wildly in his trouser pocket. It seemed that countless messages were sent at once after a delay. Li Tianlan subconsciously took out his mobile phone and opened the communication software. All the messages came from Wang Yuetong, with emojis and text. Senior brother, are you ready? Shy. Senior brother, are you ready? There should be no problem. Grievance. Senior brother, you ignore me again. Poor. Senior brother, I'm so hungry. Angry. Sweating. Grievance. Hum, senior brother, you bastard. Ah, if you don't come, your little princess will starve to death. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.